Chapter 285. Hui Mao walked around the robot and flicked his ears. That's not right. It is. Silen agreed with Hui Mao's opinion, but Silen also realized one thing: Sigma's master was definitely connected to Black Viper. Otherwise, this was the first robot Silen had encountered since he came to the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. He thought that the robots here would be more like Sigma's, but the reality was far different. Even though the robots he encountered earlier and this one were closer to human consciousness than the Robert family's robots in the League of Stars, they were still far from what he had imagined. "Who's your master?" Silen asked the robot. The robot seemed to have sunk into its memories when it heard Silen's question. "My master has many." "Many?" Hui Mao jumped onto Silen's shoulder and stared at the robot. "Do you know Sigma?" "Sigma?" The robot's eyes flashed with an indescribable light when it heard the name. However, it was soon replaced by confusion. The name sounded very familiar, but it couldn't remember anything about it. How strange. Logically speaking, a robot's memory should be pretty good. It should be able to record everything it saw and heard, and when it was needed, all it had to do was look for it in its memory. But now, no matter how hard it tried, the robot couldn't find any memories of Sigma. It should have been familiar, but it couldn't remember anything about it. Sigma. I think I know the name, but I can't remember anything about it. Strange, strange. The robot muttered to itself. Silen looked at Hui Mao. Hui Mao shook his beard. This robot must be suffering from dementia. Hui Mao scanned the robot carefully again before saying to Silen, "Let's go. We won't get anything out of it. When we get out of here, we'll find the robot maker of Black Viper. Maybe we'll get some answers from him. That's the only way." Seeing that the robot in front of him was still in a state of deep thought, Silen checked the surroundings and left the underground network with Hui Mao. Since Silen had turned off the earthquake generator, the ground had gradually returned to normal. The mess that was left behind was slowly being repaired. When Silen returned to the safe zone, Gu Xian, Tu Ba, Orville, and the others were cleaning up the carcasses of the dead animals on the ground. Those that needed to be burned were burned, and those that could be made into meat were kept. After all, they still had to stay here for more than 10 days. They couldn't go without food. The wild beasts that were shot with poison bullets couldn't be used as food. Every time they were hauled away, a detector would be used to inspect the wild beasts. It was a detector Neo had made on the spot, and it was set according to Neo's own standards. If the limit was exceeded, the meat would have to be discarded, no matter how delicious it was. On the other side, He Do, Hua Li, and Mond were chatting with a couple of strangers. Neo's unhappy face was displayed on the screen He Do was holding. Needless to say, someone must have come to seek cooperation. There were 2 Black Viper members there, and they probably didn't come here together. There were also a couple of strangers with them, and they all looked pretty strong. One of them was a muscular man with a lot of wild beast blood on his body, but he himself wasn't injured at all. It all started during the earthquake. At that time, everyone was busy fighting the vicious beasts, shooting the white mice, and cleaning up the area. He Do, who was in the safe zone, was keeping an eye on the defense system. It was at that time that He Do received a call request on her metal chain. The person who requested the call was also someone who knew the ropes. From the moment He Do agreed to the call, the person knew that He Do's location was relatively safe. The feedback from He Do provided him with a lot of evidence. Therefore, the person led a couple of other people who had been tossed here just like Silen and the others. He Do didn't know what to do. This was Neo's territory after all. Before she could clarify things with the person, her metal chain lit up again. Another person had requested a call. He Do had a good personality, and her professional knowledge was great. That was why everyone in Black Viper's territory was willing to contact her instead of spitting on Neo and Mond. Black Viper's thoughts were unimaginable. Sometimes, they were twisted to the point where they looked like they lacked a brain. People like them would start a war of words whenever they ran into each other. For example, Neo was currently spouting nonsense to the people outside through Black Dough's communicator. It was rare that Mond was on Neo's side this time. Therefore, one crazy person and another crazy person were basically idiots. Anyone would have wanted to slap them with their shoes if they heard the words coming out of their mouths. The faces of the people who weren't Black Viper were twitching a little. On the other hand, Black Viper's two local specialties were able to calmly find grammatical errors in Neo and Mond's sentences. Not far away, Ertie and another person who came with Orville were happily exchanging insults with each other. Normally, they were the ones who would vomit blood in anger, but when they saw these two crazy people fighting against the outside world, they felt like their stomachs were cramping up from laughing. When Hey Do saw Silen's figure, she ran towards him like her savior. "Hey Do, please don't move your bracelet when I'm talking. You're putting me in a difficult position." Neo started complaining again because Hey Do had moved her bracelet away while he was in the middle of a molecular argument. Now, the screen was moving so that Neo couldn't see her face from the other side. Instead, he was looking at Silen. Hey Do couldn't care less about comforting Neo right now. She cut off the communication link and explained the situation to Silen. Both parties were surprised and curious by Hey Do's behavior. Then, they looked at Mond and Huali, the two native Black Viper clansmen. They completely agreed with Hey Do's actions. Why was a person who wasn't Black Viper able to make these Black Viper clansmen with different personalities agree and obey their orders? For example, although Mond had accepted Orway and the others into his safe zone, it was only because Orway and the others had saved his life once. From the bottom of his heart, Mond did not fully acknowledge Orway and the others. He classified it as a special relationship. If Orway and the others ordered or restricted Mond to do what he should or should not do, Mond would not be happy and would resist. It was exactly because they knew that Mond was such a person that Orville and the others decided to borrow Orville's hands and connections to find a way to survive in this unfamiliar environment. Orville and the others didn't object even if Mond wanted to be a team leader on a whim. Survival was their number one priority, so they might as well let the kid be the team leader. But Silen and Neo were different. Moreover, Mond was more inclined to trust Silen after he learned about Silen's capabilities and Silen's capabilities. What Mond didn't tell the others was that he trusted Huimao more than Silen. The reason Mond could see the right path from Huimao's choice was related to his abilities. Huimao chose to trust Silen, and Mond chose to trust Silen as well. After listening to Hey Do's explanation, Silen thinks for a moment and said, "Tell them to wait outside. I'll go in and talk to Neo." "All right. Thank you, Silen." Hey Do immediately let out a sigh of relief when she heard that someone was willing to take on this difficult task. Silen and Hey Do walked back to the exit at the same time, but it was at this moment almost a dozen white mice suddenly rushed up from the ground behind them. Every single one of them was in a berserk state. Their bodies were covered in spikes, their claws were covered in thick scales, and their tails were covered in ring-shaped spikes that looked like thorny whips. "There's a problem with the defense system. Someone tampered with their defense system. Who could it be?" Everyone in this area had a scanning device installed. It was part of the defense system's surveillance circle. But now, so many white mice had appeared out of nowhere. Moreover, they were all agitated and in a very troublesome biochemical state. Because of the newcomers, Hey Do wasn't keeping an eye on them inside the safe zone. She was in automatic defense mode, and Neo was busy spitting saliva at the other two. No one noticed that the defense system was acting strangely. Although they didn't see or hear any alarms, it didn't mean that the defense system wasn't acting strangely at all. This turn of events was so sudden that no one noticed it. Gu Xian and Tu Ba were still processing the vicious beast meat in their hands, while Ertie and the others were chatting with the newcomers. Silen and Hey Do were the closest to the white mice. Silen could definitely escape on his own, but Hey Do couldn't. Escape with Hey Do. Their speed would be slowed down. A dozen or so white shadows appeared in a flash. In the blink of an eye, they were only 20 meters away from Hey Do and Hey Do. Hey Do was dumbfounded. When she saw the white mice, she had already calculated how long it would take for them to catch up to her. Less than 2 seconds. Even if she tried to escape now, she would be bitten to death in less than 2 seconds if she was chased by the white mice whose speed had almost doubled in this state. Bang! A few of the white mice that had leaped into the air and were about to tear her apart with their claws. 12 berserk white mice had all fallen to the ground. Every white mouse's head had exploded, and the wound was in the shape of a hexagon. It was a very standard hexagon. Bang 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 bang, all the white mice that had exploded their heads stopped one step away from Silin and Hey-Do due to inertia. The smell of blood unique to the white mice made Hey-Do's stomach churn. It wasn't just a symptom of being overly frightened, it was also the smell. Hey-Do couldn't help but vomit. Gu Xin and the others were still holding their guns. They didn't have time to shoot, or they didn't hit their targets after firing. The berserk white mice were too fast, and their defense was too good. As long as they didn't hit their target, they would be completely ineffective. Looking at the dead white mice on the ground and the wounds on their heads, they knew that none of this had been done by them. The group looked at Silin as if they were looking at a ghost. Mon's jaw almost dropped to the ground. He's a monster, absolutely a monster. They didn't even see what happened. All they heard was a bang, and then the heads of the 12 white mice bloomed. It was a hexagonal flower no less. Silin stood in the dead silence with a white gun in his hand. The gun was very strange. It wasn't big, but its proportions were different from a normal gun's. It was hard to imagine that this gun was the cause of such a scene. Those were 12 rats in a state of agitation. Even Gu Xian couldn't guarantee that he could kill them in one shot even if he was fully prepared, let alone 12 of them at the same time. Silin looked at the white gun in his hand. There was an emblem and an S on the gun. It was Guan Feng's Purgatory Thunder Snake S. As expected of Guan Feng's proudest creation, it was also the gun with the greatest damage in the Purgatory Thunder Snake series. Silin sighed in his heart. A great man's temper was the same for a gun. The stronger a gun was, the harder it was to control. If one were to describe this gun in human terms, it would be a freak among humans. Not everyone could tolerate its temper. Silin looked at the blood slowly dripping down his hand. The shot was shockingly powerful, but Silin himself had suffered a negative impact as well. His hand holding the gun was cracked in many places. If Silin's constitution wasn't strong to begin with, his entire hand would have exploded from the negative impact. The Purgatory Thunder Snake S was very different from the K. As expected, different Purgatory Thunder Snake series guns had different temperaments. What Silin didn't know was that the 3 heads of Black Viper were watching the scene on the screen in the distant building. This wasn't something they could have done, but they had been paying close attention to Silin all this time, and the underground network incident had piqued their curiosity about Silin. That was why they were able to see this shocking scene through the multi-angle surveillance cameras of the satellites in space. Everyone, including Guan Feng, felt like they had been sucked in a cold breath when they saw the 12 white mice. However, the tables had turned in less than 2 seconds. The meeting room was deathly silent when they saw the 12 white mice's heads explode almost at the same time. Finally, Christian let out a sigh. Guan Feng, that's your proudest creation, isn't it? I didn't think that you'd let that kid use it. It hadn't been long since Guan Feng created the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. It could be said that no one other than Guan Feng had the chance to touch it. After all, every time Guan Feng designed a new Purgatory Thunder Snake, he would go through a long period of observation. Only those who received Guan Feng's approval were qualified to own a Purgatory Thunder Snake. Every direct disciple of Guan Feng who wanted to use a Purgatory Thunder Snake had to go through many tests, many trials, countless strengthening and adaptation training, and all kinds of observation tests before they could get their hands on a gun marked with the Purgatory Thunder Snake's emblem. The higher the rank of a Purgatory Thunder Snake gun, the longer the test and observation period. Why else would there be so few people who could use a Purgatory Thunder Snake K until now? It wasn't that Guan Feng had set the bar too high or that his requirements were too strict. It was because the Purgatory Thunder Snake gun's characteristics determined that it had high standards for its user. The Purgatory Thunder Snake was very destructive, but at the same time, it was no different from suicide for those who didn't have the ability to use it. It was exactly because they understood this that they were impressed by Guan Feng's unusual treatment of Sillin and his boldness. If a student like Sillin didn't have the ability to use a Purgatory Thunder Snake S, wouldn't he have no place to cry if he was accidentally shot by a bullet? Everyone looked at Guan Feng with such thoughts in mind, but they didn't realize that Guan Feng himself was shocked. Guan Feng rubbed his forehead with a smile when he saw everyone looking at him. His fingers were still a little cold. He was probably scared by that little bastard Sillin. Although he had told Sillin to keep the gun, Guan Feng really didn't think that Sillin would actually use it. It was because the gun hadn't been perfected at all. At the time, Guan Feng had clearly told Sillin not to use the gun. The gun wasn't finished yet, and it could easily cause a suicidal effect. How could Sillin not know this when he was using the Purgatory Thunder Snake K? Of course he knew. If it wasn't for the fact that Sillin had taken out 12 white mice in the blink of an eye, Guan Feng would have used his personal means to contact Sillin and organize the little bastard who didn't know how big the universe was to use S on him. At the time, Guan Feng had placed 3 booby traps on the blueprint. He had intentionally left them there so that anyone who tried to use an S without his permission would suffer the consequences of their own actions. That way, the shooter would be the one to suffer the consequences of his own actions. No one knew how scared Guan Feng was. Even his fingers were cold right now. However, if Sillin was able to successfully take out the 12 agitated white mice with the Purgatory Thunder Snake S, then he must have perfected the gun. Sillin did have the talent to understand the parts that needed to be perfected after looking at the flawed blueprint. Of course, perfecting a gun was one thing, and succeeding in it was another. One of the high standards of a Purgatory Thunder Snake user was that the user had to be calm and capable of calculation. Every time a new model of the Purgatory Thunder Snake was born, the user's calculation ability would increase to a higher level. The S-series was especially demanding. Was the guy's brain really that big to be able to complete such a huge calculation in an instant? That was 12 white mice we're talking about. Every additional target doubles the amount of calculation required. What kind of brain does one need to have to do that? Shooting at more than 10 targets at the same time was completely theoretical. Guan Feng was conceited, but he couldn't hit 12 targets in one shot even if he was the one doing it himself. The Purgatory Thunder Snake Model K was fine, but Guan Feng could only prove that the Model S was reasonable in theory. Truth be told, Guan Feng didn't think that someone would be able to do it so soon after the Purgatory Thunder Snake Model S was born. Guan Feng didn't even have time to sigh when he saw Sillin take out a knife and start skinning the white mice. Guan Feng nearly choked on his breath. Due to the huge amount of calculations required, the instantaneous high energy consumption of the brain would cause the shooter to become dispirited or unconscious due to insufficient energy supply to the brain, and there might even be life-threatening situations. But look, that little bastard was still alive and kicking, skinning the white mouse biochemical beast. Sillin had no idea how many times he had scared Guan Feng with his actions. All he knew was that the white mice's skin was incredibly tough, and he thought that they could be used to make special protective gear for everyone. They could also be used to make some tools. After all, the tools and materials available in this area were limited, and it was a rare opportunity to run into something good. Of course he had to make the best use of it. Sillin neatly skinned one of them before twisting the skinned white mouse up and flinging it into the ground not too far away. There was a loud boom as the ground cracked and dust spread like mist. It could be seen just how heavy an intensified white mouse biochemical beast was. The explosion woke everyone up from their shock. Hua Li was the first to act. Her desire to dissect things suddenly skyrocketed when she saw Sillin skinning it. She took out a custom-made scalpel and walked next to the white mice that Sillin had just finished skinning and tossed to the side. Gu Xin and the others were still holding their guns. Their eyes twitched when they saw Sillin and Hua Li's actions. There were freaks every year, but there were especially many this year. After learning Silen's goal, Gu Xian and the others joined in and started skinning the white mice. Their attention shifted from their shock to the white mice as they continued to skin them. You don't say, these white mice are really strong after they've been activated. Erty glanced at the skin that looked like a hedgehog and touched its spikes. He clicked his tongue in praise. If they were stuck in a crowd, they'd be skewered right away. Mond was ready, but he couldn't catch mice with his hands. He could only watch from the side with Hey Do and comment from time to time. What did you see? Tu Ba teased when he saw Mond staring at a white mouse. Mond said thoughtfully, their final expression told me that they died in happiness. Which means that they were killed before they could have any other thoughts. Gu Xian pulled at the hexagonal hole in the white mouse's head and pulled at a few of its whiskers that looked as hard as spikes. He then revealed the white mouse's teeth. Hey, take this and I'll use a tooth as a dagger, Gu Xian said to Tu Ba. Tu Ba didn't give it to him, but he managed to cut off a few of the teeth himself. Tisk, so hard. Of course. Otherwise, why would I want to use this rat tooth as a dagger? Gu Xian held a large rat tooth in his hand and gestured with it, nodding in satisfaction. Tu Ba passed one of the treated teeth to Hey Do. For you to protect yourself. Hey Do hurriedly caught it. Thank you. Tu Ba waved his hand and continued cutting the tooth. Neo finally couldn't hold back any longer. He came out to witness the spectacle and collect some samples for research. The 12 white mice's protective skin was soon peeled off, leaving behind only their smooth flesh. However, this flesh was inedible. After being activated, the white mice's toxins multiplied and became even more toxic. More unknown toxic proteins were produced, and these randomly synthesized proteins were exactly what Neo needed. The white mice's flesh gradually changed from a faint reddish-brown to a deep reddish-brown, then brown, and finally black. The change was quick and obvious, just like the flesh of an apple exposed to the air. He sprayed some chemical on the white mice so that the dust wouldn't carry active toxins and spread to the surroundings. Then, he took out a 1,000-degree incendiary bomb and burned the white mice to ashes. The reason Silen was able to deal with the white mice without fear was because he knew that there was no longer any threat in the vicinity. The signal Hui Mao had detected had already escaped. However, Hui Mao remembered the signal. Since the other party was playing dirty, he would definitely pay them back double. After dealing with the white mice, Silen had Gu Xian and the others move the items back. He had a chat with Neo and the newcomers. In reality, the newcomers had only come to test the waters, but after they saw Silen instantly kill the 12 white mice, they had already made a clear decision. Working with an expert would definitely increase their chances of survival. Although there were a few lunatics here, they had to admit that this was the best place to work at this stage of the game. Now, they were speaking to Silen in a different tone. They were less aggressive and showed their sincerity. Silen thought for a moment. Neo's safety zone couldn't hold any more people. Although it still had space, it was easy to get into trouble if there were too many people. Moreover, judging from the two idiots bickering just now, they would probably fight every day if they worked together. In the end, Silen made a suggestion. He told them to move to the perimeter of the safety zone. Since they were working together, they could help each other out if there was any danger. The other party had some technology that could strengthen Neo's safety zone's defense network once more. This way, there wouldn't be another incident like the one just now. Thankfully, it was Silen. If it was anyone else, they probably would have been torn to shreds by the white mice's biochemical beasts. The two newcomers had a portion of their safety zones that could be moved. If they moved together, they would be able to build a new safety zone with a little more expansion. It would be closer to Silen's group, and they wouldn't have to deal with Mond and Neo as reinforcements either. Why wouldn't they do it? Even Silen had sent people to help build the new safety zone. It wasn't like Gu Xian and the others could just sit around and do nothing. Gu Xian even knew two of the newcomers, so they communicated with each other for a while. Just like everyone else, everyone knew nothing about this place. They had all learned this information from the Black Viper tribe. Sillin used the materials the newcomers provided and discussed the problem of the defense system with He-Do. They incorporated the technology provided by the newcomers and built some physical defenses both underground and above ground. The surveillance range was expanded a lot, and the concealment methods were improved as well. On the 20th day, the three people gathered at the meeting room's light screen were quite eye-catching. If there are no surprises, it should be those three, Gu Chang'an said. No matter who the other two candidates are, Sillin is the only one who can take over Guan Feng's position. Christy Lang's eyes flashed as he stared at the screen. Shikai hadn't said a word this entire time. He had been especially quiet ever since he received the information from the underground network's robots. Chapter 286. When there was a first, there would be a second. When Sillin's safe zone was established not far away from Sillin's safe zone, more listeners came over to request permission to build a subsidiary safe zone around Sillin's safe zone. One had to admit that Neo's safe zone was located in an excellent location. It had survived several natural and unnatural disasters without a scratch. Of course, everyone understood in their hearts that a lot of people valued Sillin's group's comprehensive abilities. Look at the configuration of their surroundings, look at the bullets they used to kill the white mice's biochemical beasts, look at the equipment they were wearing. Even an idiot would know that there was a highly skilled person overseeing this place. This place was different from the outside world. Everyone who came here did not have anything in their hands. It could be said that they had returned to a primitive environment after a night's sleep. Only in this kind of environment could Sillin's wealth better be displayed. Rob? No one would be able to beat Sillin's group, be it openly or secretly. Apart from a few temporary groups from other places, there were also a few people who hadn't split up yet. They were interested in joining after hearing about the situation here. The more people there were, the harder it would be for the vicious beasts to set foot on the mountain. Every person who came here to take this test had taken countless lives. They were all ruthless characters. Everyone knew that their chances of survival would be higher if they stuck together in an environment like this. At first, there wasn't anyone who everyone could trust to form the core of the group. However, after Sillin's appearance, everyone showed their sincerity and gathered around him. There was no lack of Black Viper people among them. Every Black Viper people had their own specialties, and they provided a lot of resources that the safe zone urgently needed. As the overall leader, Sillin led He-Do and the others to build up the defenses around the area. The establishment of any group required skills and talents. Therefore, Sillin gathered these people who had their own specialties and assigned them their own tasks. In 3 days' time, 2 more safety zones had been built on the mountain. The construction of these 2 safety zones was completed by Sillin, He-Do, and the others. Even if some people were suspicious of Sillin's identity and motives, they had to admit that Sillin had the ability to better equip the area. Therefore, the new recruits respected Sillin mainly because they viewed Sillin as a highly skilled person, just like how the people of the Empire viewed a member of the RAS. Many people were skeptical of the rumor that Sillin had killed 12 white rats in one shot. There were some who wanted to spar with Sillin, but they were beaten back as soon as they showed up. Didn't they see that Sillin was busy setting up the defensive equipment? If they wanted to spar, that could wait. In a situation like this, the safety zone's construction was their top priority. Neo was the owner of the safe zone, but Sillin had unwittingly become the decision-maker of this area. Black Viper's people knew that it was hard to talk to the psychopath, and no one wanted to argue with him if he could handle things himself. The people who weren't Black Viper knew that it was easier to talk to their own kind. After all, not everyone could accept Black Viper in such a short time. The rumors circulating around the Empire had already taken over many people's minds. If Guan Feng and Gu Chang'an hadn't told Sillin not to treat Black Viper the same way he used to, Sillin would have been on high alert against Black Viper just like them. He-Do wiped the sweat off her forehead and directed Tu Ba and the others to place the equipment at the designated locations. She made a good gesture when she saw the satisfactory results on the testing device in her hand. The combatants provided the labor, while He-Do and the others provided the technology and brain power. It's pretty much done. 3 of the 4 auxiliary safety zones have been completed, and the last one is still under construction. He-Do said to Silen. Silen looked at the completed test data and nodded. Let's rest for now. If we can't do it today, I'll go check on Neo. Silen then looked at Tu-Ba and gestured for him to stay on guard. After receiving an affirmative reply, Silen arrived at Neo's safety zone, the so-called core safety zone of this mountain. Rinho was busy analyzing the effects of the medicine in the lab, so he didn't notice Silen's arrival at all. Neo was almost completely focused on the task at hand and didn't pay attention to anything else. Other than Neo, Silen also had permission to enter the lab. Neo had set it up himself because he thought that everyone else in the lab was below the level of a chimpanzee's IQ other than himself and Silen. They weren't worth his time. Silen stared at the results on the screen and asked, "Is the medicine ready?" Neo jumped in fright when he saw that it was Silen, but he immediately returned to his work. "It's ready, but it's not very stable. It needs to be improved, or its effects will be limited." Neo was frowning all the time as he spoke. A lot of people had been eyeing his safety zone as of late, but Neo wasn't in the mood to argue with them. Silen came up with a plan, and that was what Neo had been working on recently. In the past, Neo wasn't a fan of researching white mice. A person like him who was obsessed with cleanliness would look down on research subjects that looked like secondary excrement. However, his recent interactions with Silen had piqued his curiosity. He was already rubbing his palms together when he saw Silen's experiment plan. He even boasted that he could complete it in 3 days. But to his surprise, he still hadn't succeeded after 3 days. Although the medicine was ready, it wasn't as effective as he imagined it to be. Therefore, in Neo's eyes, it was a failure. As the saying went, the more frustrated one was, the braver one became. Neo was a one-track mind when it came to this kind of work. Unless he succeeded, he would put everything else aside and focus on this one. Is the molecular formula the same as the theoretical one? Silen asked. After he gave Neo the experiment plan, he had been busy arming the safety zone with He-Do and the others. He didn't ask about the progress or results of the experiment. Neo brought up the molecular diagram of the medicine and pointed at 3 spots. These 3 spots aren't stable enough, and the molecule can't be folded to the theoretical effect. I've made a few modifications. Neo moved his fingers and brought up another diagram. This is the modified one. 2 spots have been resolved, and the stability has been verified. However, there's still 1 spot that isn't working. Silen and Neo worked together in the lab for an entire night and finally came up with a stable theoretical molecular diagram the next morning after combining the results of the analysis and the sequence of the active macromolecule with the 4th-order structure diagram. The new molecular diagram was much more stable than the previous ones, and they were very satisfied with its efficacy. It's finally done. Neo started recording the experiment. It was his habit. Silen used the synthesizer to synthesize a portion of the finished product and said to Neo, "Get some rest after you're done." Even with Neo's weak physique, he hadn't rested for more than 3 days. He didn't like to inject hormones or nutrient fluids to maintain his stamina, so he only ate some food irregularly. His complexion didn't look too good, but he couldn't hide the obvious relief and joy he showed after the experiment's success. It made him look a little more energetic. "Of course I know that. I don't need you to remind me." "Oh right, don't let unrelated people come in and disturb me." "Got it." Silen walked out of the safety zone with the synthesized medicine in hand. He glanced around before his gaze fell on a silly cat who was playing with a feather that had fallen off Ovi's body. "Wheeze, come here." When he heard Silen's call, Huimao ran over to Silen while biting the messy feather in his mouth. He jumped onto Silen's shoulder and stuck the disfigured feather into Silen's hair. "Ha, meow, Silen, you're so dumb." Silen flicked the feather off his hair and pulled Huimao's whiskers. "I'm done synthesizing the medicine. Let's go take care of those mice." Huimao's eyes lit up when he heard this. He was bored to death right now, so it was good to have something to do. Silen told Heido that everything here was settled and that he needed to give her orders. "You're going to look for that sneaky bastard?" Gu Xan asked. "Yes, I'll be fine alone. I'll give you a signal if there's a need. Just guard this place well. If anyone tries anything, don't hold back." "Of course I know that. But, won't it be too dangerous for you to go alone, ahem, just you and Wheeze?" Gu Xian quickly corrected himself before Huimao could fly into a rage. What were the people who lured the 12 white mice here planning these days? Silen definitely wanted to take care of them before they made their move. "If people respect me, I will respect them tenfold. If you pour a basin of excrement on me, I will give you a cesspool. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." "Alright, send a signal if you can't hold on. We have a lot of people here, so it won't be a problem to take care of them." Silen shook his head. "They have a hypnotist who can control a dire beast. It won't be easy for us to take care of them." Although Gu Xian didn't know what Silen was planning, he knew that Silen was a resourceful man. He stopped asking and smiled. "I really want to know what happened to them." "No problem. If everything goes well, I'll send a signal to you guys and let Heido receive the image. You'll be able to see what happens to them. We can also use this as a warning to those who have ulterior motives." Gu Xan shivered. He hadn't known Silen for very long, but his evaluation of Silen was already very high. Even Tu Ba and Erdi were very wary of Silen. This young man was always full of surprises. "Alright, I'll wait here for the good news." Silen and Huimao's departure didn't attract too much attention. The construction of the safe zone was still going on. Although there were only 5 days left until the deadline Guan Feng gave them, no one would stop the construction even if it was just 1 day. Every second spent on the safe zone was a chance for them to survive. At another place a bit further away from Neo's safe zone, Silen and the others' new detectors wouldn't be able to detect them. There were 3 people here, and one of them was the person who tricked Silen and the others back then. The other 2 had been brainwashed, or more accurately, deeply hypnotized. It was a type of hypnosis that was forbidden by the Empire. In other words, a person who was hypnotized by this method would become demented even if the hypnosis was lifted. They would never be able to return to normal. All of their memory cells would be erased, and their old memories would be forcefully replaced with new ones. They would be completely under the control of the hypnotist. The hypnotist had retained the 2 people's skills and memories, so they could use their original skills to fight their enemies just like before. Everything else, however, wasn't their own. Silen asked Heido to investigate this place, and it turned out that there were a lot of Black Viper's men in this area. These 2 people probably weren't Black Viper's men. Other than these 2 people, there were also some alien beasts, white mice, and high-rank bio-soldiers around them. Soon, amidst the white mouse's screams, the first white mouse was bitten to death by the other 3. However, this was just the beginning. White mice started appearing one after another, and their numbers were increasing. It wasn't only because of Silen's drug, but also because of the sharp screams of the white mice from both sides. The screams were like a catalyst for the drug, causing the white mice behind to become even more excited. Their bodies expanded and they ran even faster, as if they couldn't wait anymore. Silen gave Huimao a look. Huimao received the order and sent a message to Heido, who was far away in the safe zone. In the safe zone, after Heido received the signal from Huimao, she took out a projector and transferred the signal. The image shown on the projector was the scene Huimao saw. The puppeteer panicked when he saw the increasing number of agitated white mice. He couldn't understand why this was happening, so he sent out all the biochemical soldiers and the 20 or so hypnotized white mice, leaving only the 2 brainwashed people to protect him at the entrance of the cave. The biochemical soldiers and beasts were completely defenseless against the white mice in this state. A few biochemical soldiers were torn apart by the white mice, and with a few stomps of their large claws, they were turned into meat paste. What caught everyone's attention was the battle between the white mice and their biochemical beasts. Both sides were agitated white mice, but since they had been hypnotized, it would affect the potential of the white mice. Under the condition of excessive agitation, the natural white mice were more skilled than the hypnotized ones. In the beginning, the hypnotized white mice had the advantage due to their numbers, but slowly, more and more white mice gathered from other places. 10, 20, 30, the scene of the white mice biting and tearing each other sent chills down everyone's spines. These guys were indeed excellent biochemical beast weapons. The collisions, bites, and kicks caused the spikes on their bodies to shoot everywhere. The surrounding stone walls were already covered with a layer of broken spikes. The situation gradually became one-sided. The hypnotist decided to hide in the cave. Before he went in, he felt something hit him, but since he didn't see any injuries, he didn't pay much attention to it. What he didn't know was that the thing that hit him was a soft bullet shot by Silen that was filled with drugs. When the soft bullet hit the hypnotist, it broke and released the drugs, causing them to stick to the hypnotist's body. Therefore, the white mice that came one after another only had eyes for the hypnotist standing in the cave. The hypnotist ordered the two puppets to block the cave and retreat into the depths of the cave. However, the digging ability of mice was not to be underestimated, let alone the white mice that were in such a state. 1, 2. After the white mice finished dealing with the puppets, the biochemical beasts began to dig into the hole. Hui Mao took the opportunity to sneak into the cave. After all, it had a difficult task, live broadcast. Chapter 287. There was no lighting in the cave, and no light shone in, but in Hui Mao's eyes, it was extremely clear, so the signal received by Heido was also very clear. Because it was so clear, every detail could be seen clearly, and it even made people feel like they were there. Ah Shou and Heido's faces turned pale. Although the others were used to seeing blood, they still felt their scalps tingle when they saw so many agitated white mice swarming toward them. At the same time, they became more and more afraid of Silen. Perhaps everyone could not have a specific estimate of Silen's individual combat effectiveness, but Silen's ability was indeed admirable. Some people like Gu Xan might have guessed the means Silen used, but others who did not know Silen could not figure out what method Silen had used to make these white mice deal with the hypnotist. It was exactly because Silen, Heido, and the others had been guiding the construction of the safe zone and defense system for the past few days that a lot of people thought that Silen was an expert in this field. However, they didn't realize that Silen was also an expert in the field of medicine. He might not be the best, but compared to the people here, Silen could be considered a highly skilled person. A powerful hypnotist can hypnotize people with every move. Magic's hobby is to directly turn people into his puppets, so his hypnosis is strong and overbearing, completely irreversible. If you don't want to be hypnotized by him and turn into a fool, you must have a stronger willpower than him, or else you won't be able to resist it, and the result will be the same as those two people, Gu Xan whispered. The hypnotist was called Magic, and Gu Xan knew him. Although he had never met him before, he had seen information about Magic from some secret files. Magic was also on some lists of the military and was classified as a dangerous person. Looking at the bloody bodies of the two puppets ordered by the hypnotist Magic to intercept the white mice, everyone present felt a chill. Two of them had encountered Magic before. One of them avoided it because of his stronger willpower, and the other escaped because of the help of a temporary companion. So, their experience was the most intense. Inside the cave, the white mice that pounced on him didn't show any change in expression even after their arms were broken. They still followed Magic's orders. The puppets that blocked these white mice were gradually devoured clean. Magic opened the previously dug escape hole and ran outside, but he didn't expect to see two white mouse biochemical beasts running toward him just as he poked his head out of the hole. Magic was desperate. At this time, he couldn't calm down to hypnotize the white mice. He tried, but the result gave him a splitting headache. After all, such a strong and irreversible hypnosis method had side effects. Magic hadn't fully recovered, and he was forced by the situation. His mind was in a mess. Inside the cave, a white mouse biochemical beast had already rushed over while stepping on the puppet's bloodstains. Magic pulled out his gun and started firing, but a gun and bullets of this caliber were nothing more than tickles to the agitated white mouse. Even though Magic's hypnosis was amazing, his marksmanship was trash among trash. He clearly wanted to shoot the white mouse biochemical beast's glowing red eyes even in the darkness, but the bullet hit the white mouse's toe scales instead. The gray cat was crouching on top of a protruding rock at the top of the cave as it watched the live broadcast, shaking its beard. Magic roared as he fired indiscriminately, like a final vent in despair. His voice echoed in the cave, making people's hair stand on end. Finally, the white mouse's claws clawed at Magic. If it was just someone else, the white mouse biochemical beast would at most bite them and eat them, instantly ending the prey's life. But Magic had the drug laid down by Silen. After the agitated white mice arrived in front of Magic, they did not treat Magic like a puppet. Instead, they surrounded Magic and sniffed him. Their claws scratched Magic's body. Their claws were so deep that bones could be seen, but they were not fatal. But if a group of claws were to scratch him, it would be a different story. The white mouse biochemical beasts inside and outside the cave surrounded Magic and raised their claws a few times. Magic's screams rang for a long time, then gradually weakened until only the sound of the white mice's claws could be heard. The cause of death for the hypnotist, Magic, was excessive bleeding. Such a way of death was very cruel because the injured would clearly feel the loss of blood and the passing of life, as well as the deep sense of despair. At that time, Magic even wanted to use that overbearing method of hypnosis on himself, but in the end, he was unable to do so because he had no energy to concentrate on hypnosis. In fact, Silen did not expect these white mouse biochemical beasts to treat the hypnotist like this. He always thought that at most, the white mice would follow the hypnotist's scent and kill him with one claw or bite him directly. He did not expect such a bloody method to be used. It was a complete torture. Gu Xian closed his eyes. The famous hypnotist, Magic, ended up like this. He did not know what kind of expression the Austrian army would have when they found out. After all, Magic was personally classified as a high-risk person by them. Everyone who saw this image had the same thought, provoke anyone but Silen. Perhaps there were some people who came here with a fluke mentality and an attitude of muddling through life, but after seeing this image, everyone changed their attitude. No one was a fool. They understood that this was Silen's way of beating his opponent. If there was any bad behavior here, it was estimated that it would be the same as the hypnotist, Magic. Hui Mao closed his eyes after Magic was dealt with and cut off the signal. After yawning, he licked his mouth. So many mice, Silen stayed outside the cave and listened to the sounds coming from the cave and some white mice being thrown out. He sighed in his heart. There are so many white mice, can't Grandpa Cat judge the situation? Silen sent a signal to Hui Mao to quickly retreat and stop playing with these white mice. After playing with the white mice inside the cave for a while, Hui Mao slipped away. If Hui Mao used all his strength to run away, even the agitated white mice wouldn't be able to catch him. Silen shot another 3 soft bullets containing drugs into the cave. After all the white mice had entered the cave, he threw a couple of time bombs inside. Silen let out a temporary sigh of relief when he heard the explosion and the mushroom cloud rising from the other side after running far away. He had taken care of the hypnotist as well as some lab rats. The time bomb he made with those precious materials was not wasted. He looked at Hui Mao who was licking his claws on a tree branch. There were still bits of the white mice's spikes next to his mouth. Remember to wipe your mouth clean too. Got it. Inside the distant building, Guan Feng and the others praised repeatedly when they saw the disappearance of the white mice's signal and the image taken by the satellite array. Guan Feng, you're a good teacher, Christy Lang said. Guan Feng curled his lips. Good teacher my ass. I haven't even met that little bastard for long, how am I supposed to teach him? At most, I'm a talent scout who can recognize talent. Should we put those things over there? Someone asked. Christy Lang thought for a moment before drawing a circle around Silen's area. There's no need to release them here. We'll proceed with the original plan elsewhere. So we're just going to leave this area? Whatever, it's a waste of resources anyway. Silen is the only one here. We'll follow the original plan for everyone else. Alright. Gu Chang'an smiled when he heard Christy Lang's words. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that you were the one who recommended Silen. Christy Lang didn't get angry. There's no helping it. There are too few people who can take over this position. That's true. However, we can't say for sure whether or not that kid can officially take over the position. The three heavyweights fell silent at the same time. It was true that the final candidate had to be approved by an important decision-maker before he could take over. That person was the true ancestor of Black Viper. After Silen returned to the safe zone, everyone's attitude towards Silen changed noticeably. This was especially true for the newcomers. In the past, they could joke around and punch each other without any scruples, but now they were much more careful. There was no need to offend this fiend because the deadline wasn't far away. What surprised Silen and the others was that the last few days were very peaceful. Most of the white rats had been taken care of at the cave, and the remaining white rats, bioweapons, and ferocious beasts couldn't even take a step forward in front of them. The gray cat rolled from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain out of boredom, teased the wild beasts for a bit, and then climbed up the cliff to bully the great eagle Mercury. This caused Mercury to fly desperately into the sky whenever it saw the gray cat. Thank goodness this cat didn't have wings. What would happen if it did? After Silen and Heido finished setting up the defense network and discussing Neo's incomplete experiment plan with him, the last few days finally came to an end amidst everyone's confusion and worry. The timetable was based on Silen and the others. The 30-day deadline Guanfeng mentioned was actually Silen's 30th day since he arrived at the safe zone. On this day, a couple of huge spaceplanes flew into the safe zone and landed. The people inside them were all robots with human appearances. Black Viper's people had nothing to worry about. They had another spaceplane to receive them, and these spaceplanes would move their labs and workshops away from the safe zone. Silen was the first to step onto the spaceplane. Guxin, Tuba, Guxin, and the others followed behind him. When the spaceplane flew them out of the area and back to a cluster of buildings, Silen separated himself from the others. Unlike everyone else, Guanfeng drove the flying car directly to pick him up. He picked up White Knight on the way. Unlike Silen, White Knight's body was covered in wounds. He wasn't the only one. Everyone on the spaceplane he was on looked a little worse for wear. In fact, White Knight wasn't the only one. Silen's group wasn't the only one. Guanfeng smiled when he saw Silen's puzzled look. You're different from them. How so? Different roles, different positions, and different requirements. Silen raised an eyebrow. Take over. Guanfeng raised his hand and smacked Silen's head. Don't look like I don't like it. It's a good thing. To be honest, the nobles wouldn't dare offend you even if you didn't have the Gen family backing you up. You can send your people to deal with anyone who offends you. Silen and White Knight completely ignored Guanfeng's words. Is this how you teach a student? Where are we going? Silen asked. Somewhere. Of course. Silen rolled his eyes on the inside. We need to contact Nikki and the others first. There's no need. I've already told them. You seem to be prepared for everything. That's not it. It's just like how I didn't expect you to kill those 12 white mice with the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. I was so scared that I broke out in a cold sweat. I even had to force myself to calm down and talk nonsense with those old guys. Guanfeng was both displeased and proud at the mention of that incident. He had never felt so many different things at the same time in his life. White Knight's eyelids twitched. Purgatory Thunder Snake S. 12 white mice. He knew very well that the white mice weren't any weaker than the monsters that appeared later. But what did Guanfeng just say? Kill 12 white mice. White Knight was truly shocked. He thought that Sillin wouldn't run into much trouble since he looked fine, but it seemed that things were different. Guan Feng led Sillin and White Knight all the way to a port. This port was different from the one Sillin landed at. Although most of the passengers were robots, there were some humans here as well. Judging from their appearance, they weren't ordinary people and probably held a lot of weight in Black Viper. The moment he got off the car, Sillin immediately felt a few probing gazes on him. One of them was especially intense. Sillin looked over and saw that it was a rather ordinary-looking man. He didn't have much of a powerful physique, but the machine language coming from his body was very obvious. Sillin could tell. He wasn't a robot, but he was giving off a mechanical signal. Hui Mao crouched on Sillin's shoulder and wagged his tail. He told Sillin in private, "This man has a signal similar to Sigma's." This meant that the man in front of them was the one they were looking for. But now wasn't the time. After Sillin and White Knight got out of the car, another flying car swiftly landed and came to a steady stop. The man who walked out of this car looked like White Knight. He looked a little ragged, but he exuded a strong aura. Although he had withdrawn his killing intent after the battle, he still exuded an inexplicable and awe-inspiring aura wherever he went. It was obvious that Whis and Sillin weren't the type of people who would show respect. Wheeze's tail was wrapped with a feather it had plucked from Mercury's body before it separated from its body. When it swung its tail, the feather would brush against Sillin's hair. Therefore, while everyone else was trying to create a serious atmosphere, the man and the cat were swinging his tail and fiddling with the annoying feather. He completely ignored the few heavyweights present at the scene. "Aya, it's you, old man." Hui Mao pointed a paw at Gu Chang'an who was being pushed over by Chiu Su and shouted. Gu Chang'an was still sitting in the wheelchair. Sillin didn't understand. He was a man with both legs and feet, so why was he sitting in a wheelchair all the time? Did people in Black Viper all have weird habits? Because the atmosphere was quite serious, it was very quiet here. Other than some mechanical sounds, there wasn't much movement. Hui Mao's shout was quite loud. "Old man." Gu Chang'an, one of the 3 giants of Black Viper, was actually called an old man by a cat with a very mocking tone. Therefore, after Hui Mao's shout, everyone present looked at Gu Chang'an. Even the person with the strong aura just now was full of surprise. Gu Chang'an wasn't angry at all. He reached into his pocket and took out a bag of dried fish. He waved at Hui Mao. "Kitty, come here. This is the freshly made dried fish." "Everyone," Hui Mao raised his head. "You want to bribe me with just a bag of dried fish?" Although he said that, the cat had already jumped out and ran to Gu Chang'an in a few steps. He raised his paw and scooped the bag of dried fish into his arms. He even found a comfortable spot on Gu Chang'an's leg and started eating. Sillin covered his face. "This is so embarrassing." This was supposed to be a serious occasion, but Hui Mao's interference made things a lot easier. Guan Feng chuckled and spread his hands at Christy Lang and the others, indicating that it was completely normal. Ignoring the cat issue, Christian Lang sent Sillin, White Knight, and the man called Hadar over to him. "Do you 3 understand the positions you're going to take over?" White Knight nodded, Hadar nodded, and Sillin shook his head. Christy Lang explained the situation to Sillin with rare patience. There were 3 leaders of Black Viper, and each of them was responsible for their own domain. For example, Guan Feng was responsible for academics and was more active in the open. White Knight was taking over Gu Chang'an's position, and the people he came into contact with were similar to them. Hadar was taking over Christy Lang's position, a position that was responsible for decision-making and coordination. They hoped that Sillin could take over Guan Feng's position. Sillin didn't say anything. "What do you mean by similar to them?" Sillin was very confused by this sentence. "You want to know the answer? Go find out for yourself. You'll know everything about Black Viper there," Gu Chang'an said from his wheelchair. A spaceplane descended from the sky while they were talking. When the cabin door opened, Sillin saw a young man. He had seen him before at AFI, but he didn't know who he was. After this young man appeared, all the important figures of Black Viper and Christy Lang's group saluted him. The young man also saluted Christy Lang and the others in a different way. "He will lead you to the rest," Christy Lang said. "For what?" Silen asked. "To meet the ultimate decision-maker, the progenitor of Black Viper." Speaking of the final decision-maker, whether it was Christy Lang or the young man who had just appeared, all of them held the final decision-maker in high esteem. As for the term progenitor, Silen didn't understand it either. What kind of person could be called a progenitor and receive unadulterated respect from these people? Silen, White Knight, and Hadar stepped onto the spaceplane. Hui Mao jumped onto it with the bag of dried fish he hadn't finished yet. No one said a word to him. The spaceplane's cabin door closed, and they left the ground and the planet. Their destination was another planet not far from the one they were on. If the star map in his memory was correct, that planet was right at the center of this missing area. Chapter 288. The young man who brought Silen and the others here was Kensa of the Mist Bodhisattva royal family. He was one of the more influential princes, but he wasn't a high-profile prince in the affiliated schools. Zhen Xingming and Bel, the descendants of the three kings, were a lot more high-profile than they were. A prince who could show up here was definitely a special one, and Silen thought that Kensa might very well be the next heir to the throne. On the way to this planet, Kensar seemed to be more amiable. They were all young people, and the four of them were relatively close in age. Although their statuses and backgrounds were very different, Kensar said that if they could get that person's approval, they would all work together for the Empire in the future. White Knight didn't like to talk much. Even though the other party was a prince and very likely the next emperor, White Knight and Hadar still kept a cold expression on his face. Kensa and Hadar didn't mind. In fact, they really didn't. There were a lot of things Silen didn't know, but White Knight and Hadar knew a lot more than Silen. Maybe it was because they were born and raised in the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Even though Silen had read a lot about the history of the Empire, he didn't know much about its secrets. "Who is that person?" Silen asked. White Knight didn't know either. He finally gave face and looked at Kensa and Hadar when he heard Silen's question. Hadar knew a little, but he didn't want to say it because he had never met that person in person. Up until now, everything he knew about that person was from his grandfather, Christian Lang. Hadar didn't know what that person looked like or what his temper was like. Moreover, there had never been any pictures or images of that person. Other than the three heavyweights, even the people from Black Viper's headquarters had never seen that person. "That one." Kensa sighed. "I've only met him once, not too long before you guys. I can't tell you right now, but I'll warn you first. Calm down when you see that person." Recalling the scene when he first met that person, Kensar felt as if he were in a dream, and he was truly shocked. For a long time after that, he felt that whenever he closed his eyes, he would see that pair of cold eyes staring at him from the darkness, causing him to have nightmares. In the past, I'd only heard that Black Viper was the progenitor of the entire Black Viper race. Every 3 leaders of Black Viper would visit Black Viper, and every successor to the Mist Bodhisattva throne would visit Black Viper a couple of times before they inherited the throne. Kensa didn't believe in God, but most of the time, that feeling was beyond imagination. Kensar shuddered involuntarily at the thought of that time. Since Kensar did not want to go into detail, Silen could only fill in the blanks with his own imagination. Hui Mao squatted on Silen's shoulder and wagged its tail slowly. It raised its paw and scooped up the dried fish from the bag to eat. Silen's shoulder was full of fish scraps, and he could smell the fishy smell from afar. The planet in the middle of the missing area, on the star map, was a very strange planet. Why was it strange? From the data analysis of the probe, it could be seen that the planet's environment was very suitable for human habitation. However, anyone who saw it for the first time would feel an inexplicable sense of fear. It was as if they couldn't explain why. There were no satellite arrays around the planet, but there were a lot of space fortresses a certain distance away from the planet. These fortresses protected the planet very well, and every person who wanted to enter had to undergo a strict inspection. Even a prince like Kensar was no exception. After the strict inspection, Silen's group of 4 was finally allowed to enter the planet. However, they didn't use the same spaceplane as before. Instead, they used another spaceplane from the space fortress. It had a dedicated pilot. The guards of the space fortresses answered directly to the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor's orders. They didn't give face to anyone, be it the 3 kings or a prince. Not even the former emperor was an exception. The solemn atmosphere made everyone nervous. Fortunately, Silen and the others had strong mental fortitude, so they weren't truly intimidated. That being said, Silen and the others admired the guards stationed here. They were all experts among experts, and they obeyed orders and were merciless enough to act like human robots. The pilot was completely focused on piloting the spaceplane after greeting Kensar. He wasn't affected by Silen and the others in the slightest, and his attitude was one of, "Don't disturb me." Even when Hui Mao was chewing on the fish ribs inside the dried fish, the pilot didn't react in the slightest. "This guy looks a lot like you," Silen said to White Knight. Bai Yi looked at the person who was busy working in front of the control panel and said nothing. When they finally entered the planet, they could see it more clearly. There wasn't much machinery here. Most of the environments were primitive. Forests, mountains, just like the place where Silen and the others were tested. The only difference was that the environment here was more primitive, and it was large enough that it felt like they had entered a primitive kingdom of giant beasts. There were all kinds of dinosaurs, pterosaurs in the sky, and many animals that hadn't been seen on other planets. Every leaf of the ferns on the ground exuded an ancient aura. It really was a primitive place. No wonder he was called the Black Viper progenitor. The spaceplane flew into an area protected by a hemispherical barrier. There was a special landing spot there. It was the only place where mechanical things could be seen. There were buildings and machines, but no people. There were only a few robots here, and they gave Silen the same feeling as the robot he'd seen in the underground network. There was a difference in familiarity. "Let's wait here for now. They'll notify us when he arrives," Kensar said to Silen and the others, pointing at the approaching robots. The robots that looked like humans brought food to the 4 of them and chatted with Kensar for a while. Hui Mao looked at the robots for 2 seconds and then ignored them. He circled around the food on the table, sniffing it from time to time. White Knight and Hadar didn't mind. Instead, they cut off some meat and gave it to Hui Mao. Silen only ate a little and stopped eating. Not everyone could eat as much as Hui Mao. Silen was curious about his surroundings. Through the hemispherical barrier, Silen could see giant creatures walking by, as well as groups of animals that had only existed for a short time in history, only to be seen in fossils. These animals were not animals that had disappeared from one or a few planets, but creatures that had appeared and disappeared in the development of a considerable number of planets. Right now, it wasn't easy for people to restore those creatures. Many fossils were too damaged or affected by other factors to restore their genetic material as a whole. Silen had seen a lot of simulated creatures cloned by researchers using equipment to calculate the possible genetic information arrangement, but these creatures were all unstable. There were always problems of one kind or another, and even if they managed to survive, they weren't like the theoretical ones. Too much randomness made it impossible for many creatures to be restored. This had always been a regret in the minds of researchers. But here, Silen saw many creatures that were classified as species that could not be restored at this stage by the authorities of the organization. If they could not be restored, where did they come from? Silen did not think that these were creatures that had survived naturally. In just a short time, Silen had seen extinct species from at least 100 planets. Moreover, the existence of these species was distributed according to a kind of ecological stability. The people who created them had put a lot of thought into it. The entry of one species would not cause an overall change, and the disappearance of one species would not cause a chain reaction. Who had the means to do this? Just as Silen was thinking, Hui Mao, who was burying his head in food, pricked up his ears and looked in a certain direction with wide eyes. At the same time, the robots that were talking to Kenza also told Silen and the others that was coming. The animals that had been strolling lazily around the area spread their hooves and claws and ran away, afraid that they would be too slow. After almost all the animals in the area had run away, the hemispherical barrier was closed. Feeling the smell in the wind, Silen's eyes narrowed. No way! Hui Mao ran to the top of the building and looked into the distance, then shouted, "Wow! What a big snake! So fucking big! Snake?" White Knight's pupils shrank, and he looked in that direction. Kenza and Hadar straightened their clothes and stood there like obedient children. Silen could already feel the movement under his feet, and the dense branches of the tall trees in the distance were falling to the sides. Just by looking at the movement of the branches, he could tell how big this thing was. After the sound of the trees breaking and the branches being squashed, the sound got closer and closer. Finally, the big guy appeared in front of them. Its armor-like scales were scattered with dark stripes, and there were two slightly protruding lines on its back. Its broad triangular head was covered with hard scales, and there was a horn on the top of its head. This horn was like a crown, and it was crowned. It also indicated that this big guy was the overlord. With the arrival of this big snake, Silen felt the temperature suddenly drop a few degrees, and the light reflected by its scales was cold. It didn't climb directly into the area. Although the barrier was closed, this big guy didn't seem to like coming to this place. When he saw the snake, Kenza took 2 steps forward and bowed. Unlike the bow he used when facing Christy Lang and the others, Kenza's bow now was completely the etiquette of a junior to an elder, and it was the etiquette of the royal family. Kenza's expression was much more respectful, and even his voice was cautious. "Greetings." Hadar followed suit and saluted. It was not a royal salute, but it was respectful enough. However, this made Silen and White Knight stand out, because they didn't even have any reaction from the beginning. The two of them looked up at the big snake in front of them. Is this the person they were talking about? So, that person isn't a human. No wonder Kenza told them not to be too shocked. Silen finally understood why the Mist Bodhisattva Empire treated this kind of beast better than the League of Stars. It was not a python, but a viper. Although Silen did not know how the viper had grown so big and looked like this, he was certain that it was a viper, a venomous viper. After looking at them, the big snake flicked its tongue at them. Although it still looked cold and indifferent, its 2 round eyes were as cold as ice as it stared at the tiny people below it. However, Silen could sense that this big guy was very impatient. In fact, Silen thought that if this was a human, it probably would have spat on them instead of flicking its tongue. The big snake ignored them and looked at Hui Mao, who was staring at it curiously from the top of the building. It was this cat that was making strange noises just now. "Who are you?" the big snake asked. As it spoke, Silen saw the fangs in the big snake's mouth. This snake was extremely poisonous. Kenza and Hadar, who had just finished saluting and hadn't straightened up yet, heard the big snake's words. They looked to the side and saw the cat jump in a beautiful parabola onto the 2 big nostrils at the top of the big snake's snout. Silen and the others. How the fuck is this guy so bold? Kenza felt the hair on his back freeze, and his hair was about to stand on end. The robots also quietly gathered around Kenza. If the big snake went berserk, they would protect them and escape, especially Kenza. They couldn't let anything happen to this prince. Hui Mao jumped onto the big snake's nostrils and looked at the 2 slender eyes that were looking at him. He raised his paw and patted the thick, cool scales he was sitting on and said, "Hello, my name is Hubelu, and my nickname is Wheeze." Silen covered his face. Who cares about your nickname at a time like this? Strangely, the big snake didn't go berserk. Instead, it said, "You're quite bold. Thank you for the compliment." Hui Mao said proudly. Kenza cursed in his heart. Isn't this a compliment? What are you so proud of? Yo, you're over 200 years old, aren't you? The big snake said. Its voice was filled with affection. Over 200 years old? White Knight, Kenza, and Hadar looked at Silen. Was this little cat that old? The corner of Silen's mouth twitched, and he nodded. Then how old are you? Hui Mao asked. He couldn't calculate the age of this big snake because it was too strange. It didn't seem like it grew up naturally. Something must have happened during its growth that caused it to mutate. Me? The big snake stuck out its tongue. I don't remember. About 1,000 years old. 1,000-year-old snake. This was the first time Silen had seen one. No wonder this old guy was called the ancestor. Letting Hui Mao play around with its nose, the big snake looked down at the people below. These are the candidates for this batch. Yes. Kenza secretly wiped his sweat. It really scared him. He should stay away from cats in the future. The big snake looked at Silen and the others and nodded. Come on up. I'll take you there. Kenza gestured for Silen and the others to climb onto the back of the big snake. The big snake would take them somewhere. There, they would learn about the origin and development of the black viper. This wasn't the first time Silen had climbed on the back of a snake, but this time, the snake was much bigger than Bonner. The scales on its back looked ferocious. After Silen and the others climbed onto the back of the big snake didn't say anything to Kenza. It turned around and left in another direction. In this primitive environment, the big snake was indeed at the top of the food chain. Wherever it went, other animals would avoid or hide, so there was no obstruction along the way. After climbing through a forest and coming to an open area, the big snake sped up and brought Silen and the others to a mountain range. There was a big hole in the mountain range. This should be the big snake's nest. Chapter 289. The serpent led Silen and the others in. After entering, the cave entrance was obviously much wider. Some of the mountains had a large hole dug out, forming a passage. Even the serpent could crawl freely in it. It was obvious how big the project was. The most valuable thing was that Silen could feel that the entire mountain range was a combination of mechanization and nature. Advanced technology had been integrated into the primitive foundation, and there were countless mechanisms and hidden compartments. If the serpent hadn't led them here and someone had tried to barge in, they might not be able to find those hidden things even if the entire mountain range was turned upside down. It might even cause the entire planet to explode. This was the true core of the entire planet. There was no mechanical lighting in the passage, only traces of light cast through the cracks in the stones. Finally, Silen saw a place that was glowing. It was a rather spacious area surrounded by mountain walls. There was an opening above, and the light shone down, illuminating the place. A large circular pool came into view. The water surface reflected the light, and there was a floating hut on the pool. However, the serpent didn't allow Silen and the others to approach the hut. There were some small flowers on the grass beside the pool, and they were growing very well. It was very warm here. Silen and the others came down beside the pool and looked at the place. There were many murals on the surrounding mountain walls. They had been specially treated to prevent the rain from corroding them, so that these murals could be preserved here forever. They were very simple strokes with a somewhat childish feeling. Then, slowly, the strokes matured, becoming smoother and more detailed. It was like a record of a person from childhood. In those simple murals that looked like graffiti, Silen felt that they were related to the serpent and a person. In the simple sketch of a person, there was a thin curved line wrapped around the small person's arm. That should be the original appearance of the serpent. Most of the murals were drawings of a person and a serpent. The small person threw the serpent above his head, twisted the serpent's tail, and gave the serpent a fruit, but it got stuck. It looked like a line that was tied into a knot. 3 light screens popped out and flew in front of Silen and the others. There was a light screen in front of each of them, and on it were some drawings and text records. The light screen flickered, and the rectangular light frame covered Silen and the others. The three people who were enveloped in this rectangular light shield would see a projection, as if they were inside it. The light screen in front of them was like a navigator. Where they wanted to go, and what they wanted to know, it would be displayed and analyzed for them. First, Silen chose a button under the root directory. It was the section about the origins of Black Viper, and very few people paid attention to it. Normally, people would choose the general origin of Black Viper first, but Silen chose the individual stories. After making his choice, Silen felt the projection around him change. Then, a different scene appeared. A little boy was sitting in the courtyard. He was very quiet, and unlike the others, he did not fit in with his surroundings at all. No one wanted to talk to him, and even if they did, they would only say a few words to him before leaving with a bad look on their faces. This was because no matter what they said, the little boy would either stare at them silently, or reply with a few completely unrelated words. It was no wonder that such a strange scene had formed. This young boy was another core figure of the origin of Black Viper. He was the fourth son of the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor from 1,000 years ago. He was the most influential person in the history of the Mist Bodhisattva Empire. Compared to his father's famous name, there was very little information about him in the historical records. Silen learned a lot about Mist Bodhisattva Freeman from the written records on the light screen. Silen was very interested in this person. He even looked through all the video records about Mist Bodhisattva Freeman. He only skimmed through the development of Black Viper, its combat strength, and destructive power. Mist Bodhisattva Freeman. Among the sons of the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor of that generation, he had a very low presence. In fact, he was a person that many people gossiped about out of boredom. This was because Freeman was different from other children after he was born. He was quiet, of few words, and looked at people with a very strange gaze, even to his birth parents. Most of the time, he entertained himself, like a person living in his own world. Later on, Freeman saw a little black striped viper in the garden and raised it. However, in order to protect the prince, the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor had his men inject the little viper with a toxin-dissolving agent. And so, when Freeman was 7 years old, he made his first friend. This friend couldn't talk, couldn't laugh, and wasn't even human. Freeman named this viper, Black Viper. Many of the drawings on the mountain walls that Silen saw were Freeman's drawings. Just as Silen had expected, they were all drawn by the Mist Bodhisattva Freeman. Although Freeman didn't talk much with other people, he talked a little more with Black Viper. Perhaps in the eyes of others, Freeman was talking to himself. The reason why Silen paid so much attention to Freeman wasn't entirely because he was curious about the prince. In the first image, Freeman was only a 2-year-old child. Freeman played with the levitating blocks that were very popular in that era. Because Freeman was a bit of a loner, he was often alone in his small room. Freeman took out the levitating blocks and assembled them. He assembled a picture of an airplane. The workmanship of the levitating blocks was very detailed, enough for any child to use their imagination. Perhaps many children would assemble some strange patterns, or just play according to their preferences at the time, but Freeman treated it like a mission. When assembling, he placed almost all his attention on the levitating blocks in front of him. His assembly was similar to the airplane toy on the table next to him. The placement and assembly of each levitating block seemed to have been rehearsed in advance, without the slightest mistake. Starting from the head of the airplane, he gradually completed the other parts, and soon, an aircraft-shaped block puzzle appeared. If it were any other child, regardless of whether they could complete such a task alone, they would definitely show it off after they completed such a project together, win their parents' praise, and enjoy the envy and jealousy of their peers. However, Freeman did not do so. With a wave of his hand, he messed up the pattern and then assembled it for the second time. However, he didn't look at the model during the second assembly process, and he didn't start from the front of the airplane, but from the fuselage. The second assembly took much less time than the first, and it was much more perfect. Even though it was just a levitating block, the compatibility between each block was perfect. Such a assembly was actually the work of a 2-year-old child. Then, Freeman messed up the completed work again and assembled it again. However, the result of the assembly this time was somewhat different from the airplane toy. Cylon deliberately pulled out the actual picture of the fighter jet of that era to take a look. There must have been some simplified parts in the toy, but Freeman relied on his intuition to restore the simplified parts of these toys without seeing the real thing. It had to be said that Freeman was a genius. And in the later images, as Freeman grew up, he no longer came into contact with levitating blocks, but some more sophisticated toys. He disassembled these toys and assembled them into jaw-dropping works. The Emperor of Mist Bodhisattva discovered something special about this child who had a very low sense of existence, so he found a tutor to teach him, but the effect was very frustrating. No matter how teaching was done, there had to be a process of communication between the tutor and the student first. Even if there was no communication, as a student, it was right to listen to what the tutor said and see what the tutor did, right? But Freeman didn't. He was still the same, minding his own business. Other than the little viper wrapped around his arm, there seemed to be no one else in his world. Therefore, the Emperor of Mist Bodhisattva had no choice but to let Freeman fiddle with it himself. In a part of the palace, there was a special activity area for Freeman, which provided all of Freeman's toys and some teaching videos. Gradually, Freeman faded out of people's sight and out of the circle of people's topics. Occasionally, someone would mention him in private, the child whose soul was eaten by the devil. That was how people described Freeman. Later, Freeman fiddled with something and blew up a building in the palace. Since then, Freeman was classified as a dangerous person, and many people in the palace tried to avoid Freeman as if he were the plague. And because of the communication barrier, he had a grudge with his big brother who was chosen as the heir back then. Perhaps he didn't even know that he had a grudge with his big brother, and he didn't realize it when he offended someone. He just lived in his own world, and didn't even feel lonely. The Emperor of Mist Bodhisattva had no choice but to send Freeman away in order to better train his eldest son as the heir. Freeman chose a place in the star map, an obscure planet. That was the planet Cylon was currently staying on. As a prince, the Emperor of Mist Bodhisattva provided Freeman with a lot of things. Anything Freeman wanted, he would provide. Perhaps this was the Emperor of Mist Bodhisattva's compensation to this son who had no sense of existence. When Freeman was 17, a large-scale civil war broke out in the empire. Several high nobles joined forces to rebel, and for a time, the empire was filled with an uneasy environment. People of the royal family had to be protected by guards, even Freeman, a prince who had been kicked out of the capital star region. One day, a team of royal guards was sent to this planet. By chance, the captain of the guards found a gun that Freeman had casually tossed to the side like a toy. This gun was very similar to the common guns the captain had seen before, so the captain fired a shot when he was bored. As a result, the area was blasted into a huge pit more than 100 meters in diameter, and the area around the pit was filled with sporadic sparks that didn't go out for a long time. The soil and stones there didn't look like they had been blasted to this state, more like they had been instantly burned away. The part between the captain's thumb and index finger that was holding the gun cracked, just like when Cylon first used the Purgatory Thunder Snake S. Seeing this result, the captain's hand trembled, not knowing whether it was because of the crack or because he was shocked. Later, the captain found a lot of weapons that were much better than those of that period in Freeman's place, so the captain reported it to his superiors. In that chaotic period, the Emperor of Mist Bodhisattva was very surprised by this news. The main reason that turned the situation around wasn't these much improved weapons, but the birth of high-density compressed energy reserves and the discovery of the steady-state enhancement potion. These were all created by Freeman, and it was also a technological reform with far-reaching significance in the history of the Empire. However, the public history of the Empire didn't record it in such detail. It only mentioned that these new technologies were discovered during the rebellion, and didn't mention Freeman himself. But after that, news leaked out, and Freeman was assassinated. The assassin broke through many obstacles and finally had the chance to shoot Freeman. At the critical moment, the black-striped viper blocked the bullet for Freeman, and the viper itself was broken into several pieces by the bullet. If such a bullet had hit Freeman, it would have killed him instantly. Freeman ignored the others, ignored the assassin, and ignored the guard captain's shouts of, "Hide." Instead, he left with the broken viper and entered his room. Freeman's room was also his laboratory. When Freeman came out again, the broken viper had been reconnected, but its appearance had changed a lot. Scylla also finally understood that the reason Black Viper was able to live for more than 1,000 years and grow into its current appearance was all because of Freeman. After watching all the images of the prince, Scylla finally understood what Gu Chang'an meant when he said, "this kind of people." After learning about Freeman's abilities, the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor formed a group to gather children like Freeman. The Mist Bodhisattva Emperor asked Freeman to give the group a name, and Freeman only said one word, Black Viper. That was the embryonic form of Black Viper. As time passed, the group grew larger and larger, and the Emperor discovered more and more that these people were different from ordinary people. In many ways, they were even stronger than the people of the RAS. While it was a pity, these people also obtained a talent that others didn't have. It was like a sharp blade that could be used as a weapon, but a moment of carelessness could also cause damage to the user. If the enemy got their hands on it, it would be even more dangerous. Therefore, the Emperor issued an order that from then on, Black Viper would move completely into the shadows. People would forget some of the short-lived rumors of that time, but Black Viper's technological achievements had unknowingly spread to every star region of the Empire. These people in Black Viper couldn't blend into normal life, and they were always subconsciously ostracized. Even the most advanced technology couldn't make them the same as a normal person. It couldn't change their special central nervous system, or their strange behavior or temperament. They seriously lacked emotional contact with other people, and they didn't realize that their strange behavior would be ostracized by others. Some people were terrifyingly quiet and unapproachable. However, their narrow self-world allowed them to have more eye-catching skills, extraordinary memory, calculation, and so on. These skills were a stark contrast to their learning difficulties in other areas. Ah Sho, Neo, and the others were just like Scylla. Some people didn't know how to laugh or cry, but that didn't mean they didn't have feelings. Freeman, for example, didn't cry even when Viper was cut into several pieces by a bullet. He always looked indifferent to everything. However, Scylla believed that Freeman was sad when he saw Black Viper being cut into several pieces. In fact, he was a little desperate and painful when he stayed in the lab for 5 days and 5 nights until he snatched the snake's life back from Azrael's hands. People like this had their own unique frequency. It was just that no one else could obtain it. They weren't sick, they weren't weirdos, and they weren't people whose souls were devoured by demons. They were just different from us. Even though this world has its flaws, we should all believe that every flower has its own reason for blooming. Looking at the technology that had slowly seeped into people's lives over the past 1,000 years, Scylla finally understood what Gu Chang'an and Guan Feng really meant when they said, "Don't look at Black Viper the same way you used to." So that's why. This was the source of Guan Feng and Gu Chang'an's strong emotions. Guan Feng might not be this kind of person, but Gu Chang'an definitely was. After seeing all this, Scylla could already tell them apart. The reason why Gu Chang'an liked to stay in a wheelchair despite his nimble legs was because he could only feel at ease in a wheelchair. To others, this habit might seem like a strange habit that couldn't be explained. But Gu Chang'an was exactly this kind of person. Sitting in a wheelchair and staying in a small, if not dark, room would make him unusually focused. There was also White Knight. White Knight's example was similar to the one recorded on the screen. That person had 2 colored pupils just like White Knight, and they seemed to see a different world than normal people. Scylla didn't know what kind of world White Knight saw, but Scylla finally understood why Guan Feng had asked White Knight to fight for this position. Maybe only someone like him would be able to think for the sake of the group. Black Viper was no longer the small group it used to be. Their strength and ability had grown considerably. Back then, the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor hoped that this blade could be used to protect the empire in the end. This blade was a gift from his son who had a weak sense of existence. That was why the Mist Bodhisattva Emperor put a lot of effort into choosing a leader for Black Viper. In the end, he decided to choose 3 leaders to manage this special group together. Each of them had their own role, and that was how things developed to this day. Every successor would come here to visit this giant snake who had lived through many generations of Mist Bodhisattva Emperor. If it hadn't been for this giant snake, no, it should be a small viper, who had saved Freeman back then, there wouldn't have been any more technology, and there wouldn't have been an organization called Black Viper. Every time the Mist Bodhisattva royal family saw the giant viper, they would feel an inexplicable sense of confidence. The existence of the modified Black Viper was like faith. Yes, it was like a kind of faith. If this faith was gone, Black Viper would suffer a huge blow. Sillin and the other 2 went about their own business, trying to understand this mysterious organization through their own questions and the answers they hoped to find. Black Viper coiled quietly at the side. It had seen too many generations of leadership candidates, and most of them could only make it say, yes, instead of good. Yes meant that the candidate who came here could truly inherit the position of Black Viper's leader, and good meant that the candidate was truly acknowledged by the giant snake. However, there were very few good comments. The giant snake looked at White Knight and Sillin with a bit of warmth, especially Sillin. The giant snake was very satisfied with Sillin. He knew what everyone was looking at, and he could see their temperament and priorities from their choices. There were very few people who would patiently watch all of Freeman's videos, and Sillin was one of them. The giant snake approved of people like him even more. Hui Mao rolled a few times in the grass nearby before jumping onto the giant snake's back. He lay there quietly and closed his eyes to sleep. "You're a good master," the giant snake said. Hui Mao's ears flicked. "He's not my master, and I'm not a pet." "Good, you're not a pet," the giant snake said with a smile. "However, Sillin is indeed a good person. No, let me tell you, this kid was very cunning back then. He made me sign an unfair contract. Back then." Hui Mao angrily told the giant snake about how Sillin tricked him into signing an unfair contract and debt agreement. The giant snake listened quietly, and its eyes that were as cold as the abyss gradually warmed up. The gray cat grew tired of talking, so it jumped to the side of the pond and drank some water. When it saw that Sillin was still standing there, it ran to the light barrier where Sillin was and urinated in passing. After he was done, Hui Mao twitched his nose and chuckled. He ran to the giant snake's nose and continued to criticize Sillin's misdeeds. There was wind here, and the wind was warm, giving people an inexplicable sense of tranquility and warmth. The giant snake liked to stay here. Even when there was no sunlight, it was still warm. It was the same warmth he had felt back then. Finally, the time was up. The light shield faded, and Sillin and the other 2 recovered from that state. The way Sillin looked at Haiteng also changed. However, a familiar stench soon attracted Sillin's attention. Even a cyborg cat's urine smelled. "Who?" Sillin gritted his teeth. Hui Mao wagged its tail and flicked its ears, ignoring Sillin. It looked like it didn't know what was going on. The smile in the giant snake's eyes surprised White Knight and Hadar. They didn't expect the snake's eyes to be so easygoing. Why was Sillin able to make this snake, who didn't even give face to the Mist Bodhisattva royalty, look at him like this? Was it because he had a cat? White Knight and Hadar couldn't understand. But after reading the information on the light screen and learning more about Haiteng, they didn't have time to think about why Sillin was given special treatment. They waited for the giant snake's evaluation. The giant snake obviously knew what they were thinking. It said slowly, "This generation is pretty good." Hadar let out a sigh of relief. The giant snake gave him too much pressure. He didn't feel this way even when he was facing his grandfather. After receiving the giant snake's evaluation, the 3 of them knew that their inheritance was confirmed. A large light screen appeared not far above them. After the giant snake tapped a few times with its tail, a small hole appeared in the mountain wall, and a small flying robot flew out. Go out. It will take you away. There will be a spaceplane parked there after you leave the mountain range. You can take that spaceplane and leave. After saying this, the giant snake looked away. The three of them looked at each other, bowed to the giant snake, and left. Goodbye, I'll come back to see you when I have the chance. Hui Mao said as it patted the snake's scales, which finally had some warmth. The giant snake watched as the gray cat jumped down and chased after Silen with its tail raised. Then, it jumped up onto Silen's shoulder familiarly. Its eyeless eyes carried a kind of inexplicable emotion. It was a little sad, a little emotional, and also a kind of nostalgic happiness. It was as if it was recalling certain memories. Silen used to say that people blinked when they were smiling because they were thinking of happy things. However, the giant snake didn't have eyelids, so it couldn't blink. Some people could only see the coldness in its eyes, but few could see the emotions hidden deep in its chilling eyes. Silen and the other two left through another tunnel with the small robot. This tunnel wasn't as big as the one they came from. It was meant for humans. The three of them didn't say anything. After reading the records, they were all thinking about it. Their thoughts might be different, but one thing was the same. The three of them had a clear change in their view of the Black Viper organization. Even Hadar, who grew up in the Black Viper, was shocked. Any one of the things they learned today was enough to shock people for a long time, so it was understandable that the three of them were behaving this way. When Silen was reading the records, he also realized that the rise of the robots in the Black Viper happened 1,000 years ago. However, Silen couldn't find more detailed information here. If he wanted to know more about the robots, he had to go to the people involved. Wheeze, I suddenly remembered something, Silen said. What is it? Hui Mao asked lazily. He had been complaining to the snake about Silen and didn't get much sleep. Did you wash your claws after you peed? Hui Mao pulled his ears back and pretended not to hear it. Not long after Silen and the other two left, a sound came from the other side. It was the sound of the giant snake. However, this sound was different from the hissing of ordinary snakes. This sound was like a wonderful carrier, with solemnity and tranquility, containing some indescribable emotions. After hearing it, people would be moved, and their consciousness would recall many things that had left a deep impression in their memories of the past. The giant snake raised its head and let out a cry, then went to the hut above the pool. The modified viper had changed a lot over time. It could speak, but the person it wanted to speak to was long gone. There was a person inside the wooden house. This person was quietly lying there, as if he was in a deep sleep, but his face was still clear. Although he was old to the point where he no longer looked young, his sleeping appearance was the same as before, as beautiful as a child. Chapter 290. The little robot took Silen and the others out of the mountain range and flew back. Just like the Viper said, a spaceplane had been prepared here a long time ago. The trio flew it back to the landing site. The Viper was the one who brought them here, so their journey was smooth and unimpeded. But there were still some flying beasts in the sky who were curious about them even though they were riding the spaceplane. They didn't dare to kill the beasts on this planet carelessly, so their main priority was to avoid them. It was not easy for them to return to the landing site on this planet. The three of them did not leave immediately. Instead, they rested for a while and chatted. After all, the three of them would be working with Kenza in the future. Even though the three of them were in charge of different departments, they were still in charge of the Black Viper organization. Silen and Hadar weren't people like White Knight, so neither Silen nor Hadar would interfere with the management of people like him. Silen was an academic major, so he was involved in a lot of things. But if Silen took over, what would happen to the Royal Academy of Sciences? Was he going to hang a sign on both sides like Guan Feng? Silen didn't know why they trusted him so much. Was it just because of Guan Feng's recommendation and the Viper's approval? If they found a way to return to the League of Stars, Scylla would definitely go back. What should they do then? After learning that the Viper had agreed to take over the throne, Kensar was a lot more easygoing than the Viper's successor. From Kensar, Scylla learned that the Viper's opinion greatly influenced the choice between the royal family and the current leader of Black Viper. The reason the Viper was able to survive until now was because it was very intelligent, and the more intelligent an animal was, the more trustworthy its instincts were. At the very least, there hadn't been any problems with the leader of Black Viper until now. For the past 1,000 years, Black Viper had maintained its mystique as the #1 dark power. Plus, Scylla's new position was a pretty important one in Black Viper, but there were 3 leaders in Black Viper at the end of the day. Even if something were to happen to one of the leaders, the other 2 leaders could take care of it as long as the imperial family didn't interfere. Not to mention that Black Viper was backed by the Mist Bodhisattva royal family. After a short break, Kensar dealt with some matters here and applied to leave. That's right, even the future Mist Bodhisattva Emperor and the 3 titans of Black Viper were here. After getting permission to leave, the pilot allowed them to board the aircraft. However, before they left, a flying robot flew over. This flying robot was similar to the one that guided Scylla and the others out of the mountains, but it was bigger. This is a gift from the Black Viper King, the flying robot said as it took out a plate. There were 4 sets of clothes on the plate. They were clothes made from the molted skin of the snake. Due to the Black Viper's unique characteristics and its monstrous age, its molted skin was highly resistant to radiation, acid, alkali, cold and heat. It could even be used as a bulletproof vest, and it was also very beneficial to the human body. It was an extremely rare treasure. The snakeskin had been suppressed and processed, so it was very thin to the touch. But even Scylla couldn't tear this snakeskin clothing easily. The 4 sets of clothes were given to Scylla and the others. Every piece of snakeskin was tailor-made and perfectly suited for them. Kensar felt flattered. He hadn't received such good treatment when he came here before. It was already good enough that the robot was giving him face and talking to him, but he was making snakeskin clothes for him. Dream on. Forget Kensar, not even the royal family members who came here before were treated like this. But today, Kensar didn't think that it was because of him, or he would have received one the last time he came here. It seemed that the Black Viper King was very satisfied with this generation's successor. The 4 of them knew the value of the snakeskin clothes in their hands, so they carefully put them away. When they were about to thank him, the flying robot took out a leather ball and a few pieces of special-looking scales. What was more surprising was that these things were for Huimao. Huimao had only mentioned it casually on the way to the mountains. He didn't expect the Black Viper to really make a leather ball out of its own snakeskin. Huimao played with it for a while and thought it was pretty good. As for the scales, they were very heavy. Huimao scratched them with his claws and took a few bites. He nodded in satisfaction. Very good, thank you, Big Viper. Huimao lifted the leather ball with his tail and handed the scales to Scylla. Scylla and the others' eyes twitched. What are these scales for? Kensar asked Huimao. To sharpen my teeth and claws, Huimao said matter-of-factly. The 4 of them, how extravagant. What cat would sharpen its claws with the scales of a 1,000-year-old viper? After thanking them, the flying robot did not say anything else. The Black Viper had no intention of communicating via video, so the 4 of them didn't force themselves. After saying a few words to the flying robot, the 4 of them stepped into the spacecraft and left. When the spaceplane flew into space, Celine and the others could see the figure of the Viper on the mountain range. They could see the big guy with their naked eyes. They didn't see it on their way here, so it must have stayed in the mountain range at that time. The Black Viper watched from outside the mountains as the spacecraft left, then went back into the mountains. Everything on the planet returned to its original state. Ordinary beasts would piss their pants at the smell of a 1,000-year-old viper, so every time the Black Viper came out, it would cause a commotion. After the black viper returned to the mountains, the other animals at the top of the food chain would come out again to show off. The four of them felt a lot more relaxed after changing to the spacecraft. After all, there was always a serious and oppressive feeling in the specially made spacecraft. Kensar and Hadar didn't say anything. They were a lot more relaxed after the change and started chatting about the current affairs of the Empire. Now that Hui Mao had a toy, it didn't stay with Silan and the others. It was happily playing with a ball. The balls he bought in the past couldn't even take a few swipes from the gray cat before they were decommissioned, but this snakeskin ball was a lot better. The gray cat had a lot of fun during the voyage, and if the broken instruments were excluded, the return trip could be considered a smooth one. Kensar looked at Hui Mao, who was rolling around with the ball on the ground. He couldn't help but admire Guan Feng and Gu Chang'an. No wonder they treated the cat differently. They were using it to please the black viper. If it weren't for the cat, he probably wouldn't have the snakeskin suit he was wearing. Although he was the prince of a solar system empire, Kensar wouldn't dare use the skin of a 1,000-year-old snake to make a suit even if he were to ascend to the throne. Guan Feng and the others were informed of the results by the time they returned to the testing planet, so they gathered some of the important figures in Black Viper for a meeting. To Silan's disappointment, Shikai had to leave due to an emergency. Other than a few Black Viper executives who couldn't make it to the meeting due to special reasons, everyone else gathered in the meeting room to announce the succession of Silan's trio. Kensar was one of the people present, and he was the witness to the succession of Silan's trio. Since the three heads of Black Viper were in charge of different areas, the time of their succession would be different as well. After the meeting, the three successors would have a private meeting with their original leaders. Silan would have a more detailed discussion with Guan Feng after the meeting, and Guan Feng would explain some of the things he needed to pay attention to in private to Silan. Everyone, including Kirsty Lang, looked envious when they learned that all four of them had been given a snakeskin suit. No matter how advanced the technology was, it was impossible to make the skin of a 1,000-year-old snake exactly the same. Moreover, the Black Viper's skin was different every time it shed its skin. This snake was constantly evolving and mutating, and no one knew what it would become in the end. However, there was one thing that everyone agreed on: the skin of this special 1,000-year-old viper was definitely good stuff. The most unique and enviable thing in the meeting room was the gray cat. It was fiddling with the rubber ball as if no one was around, and there were a couple of times when the rubber ball jumped onto the meeting table, but no one went back to scold it. In fact, everyone was looking forward to the rubber ball jumping in front of them so that they would have the chance to touch this special rubber ball in broad daylight. Those who knew the ropes could see that the snakeskin Huemao's ball was even better than the clothes Silan and the others were wearing. Forget the Black Viper members, even Kensar missed the feeling of the ball a lot. He had the chance to touch it on the spaceplane, and it felt so fucking good. Only Silan, who understood some of Huemao's vile nature, knew that the cat was toying with them. With this cat's ability, how could it not control the direction of the ball? Bullshit. The moment Huemao's whiskers trembled, Silan immediately knew what the cat was up to. The meeting ended with Huimao throwing the ball. Silan and Guan Feng would leave together after the meeting was over, and White Knight would stay behind to accompany Gu Chang'an. AF1's file on White Knight would also be wiped clean. Oh right, what will happen to Nikki and the others, Coach Guan? Silan asked. There was no way he would believe that Guan Feng would let them go so easily. He would either wipe their memories completely or force them to join Black Viper. Guan Feng smiled innocently. Their files will be wiped clean as well. In other words, they would be dragged into Black Viper. But that didn't matter. Silan suspected that Guan Feng had planned this from the start. They didn't join any other force or organization, so they were dragged into Black Viper one step at a time. The gray cat had been lured over by Gu Chang'an's bag of dried fish. It was currently lying lazily on Gu Chang'an's thigh and eating the dried fish, leaving crumbs everywhere. Gu Chang'an pinched the ball in his hand with a smile and allowed the gray cat to wipe its mouth on purpose, smearing the crumbs all over Gu Chang'an's pants. The old man and cat duo caused the faces of the Black Viper members and Xiao Su, who was pushing the wheelchair, to twitch. Let's go, glutton. Silen called out to Huimao from next to a spaceplane. All right. The gray cat stuffed the rest of the dried fish into its mouth and flicked the rubber ball in Gu Chang'an's hand away with a sweep of its tail. Every time the rubber ball was about to hit the ground, the gray cat would jump up and sweep its tail to send the rubber ball flying to its calculated destination. When Huimao finally stopped in front of Silen, he caught the ball with his tail and walked into the spaceplane with his chin raised. After bidding farewell to the people waiting outside the spaceplane, Silen and Guan Feng left and flew back to the capital region. Unlike when he came here, Silen now had another identity. It might not be a secret identity, but it allowed him to take care of some problems without the Zhen family's help. Moreover, Silen was also able to access some deeper information. He had been away for a long time, and it was time for a new semester exam. However, Silen wasn't afraid. Silen had learned all of the courses he was going to take, and Guan Feng had even given him a private lesson. Therefore, he was confident that he could pass both the exams and the semester exam. After returning to AF1, Silen had to prepare for a couple of exams. Huimao was bored anyway, so he went to look for the animals of AF1. However, a commotion broke out in the area, especially the semi-bo na. He was knocked out cold by Huimao's ball. It wasn't because Huimao threw the ball with too much force, but because the ball carried a natural suppressive aura that caused Bo Na to flinch and faint. At first, he was going to look for a human, no, an animal to play with, but not a single animal dared to touch the ball at all. Humans might not be able to feel it, but animals could deeply feel the fear of standing in front of a gigantic object and not being able to struggle free. It was just a ball, but it was enough to cause a lot of animals in AF1, especially reptiles. The culprit, Huimao, regretfully took the ball and looked for someone to play with after causing a commotion. Animals couldn't do it, so he went looking for a human. There were a lot of genius children in AF1, but Huimao only knew a few of them. Taita was one of them. Huimao ran into Taita, who had just finished his exam while he was picking the ball up and down with his tail. He called Taita over to play with him. The cat might be a little stupid sometimes, but there were some things he understood very well. For example, he wouldn't tell anyone about Black Viper. That was why when Taita asked what Huimao had been doing lately, Huimao's answer was, visiting a friend. That snake counts as a friend now, doesn't it? Today, Silen's doorbell rang right after he returned to the dorm after he finished his final exam. Silen let out a sigh when he saw the image on the screen. The door opened, and Zhen Xingming, Naimi, and Zhen Xingming squeezed into the room to question him. Hey, Silen, where have you been all this time? We've been looking for you many times. Yeah, I even asked second grandpa, but he only said that you had something to do. He didn't say what you were going to do. Could it be, you went to pick up girls? Naimi asked with a perverted look on his face. Silen rolled his eyes at them. He almost lost his life when he had the time to pick up girls. It's nothing, I went out with Coach Guan for a bit. Coach Guan and the others stopped asking questions after they heard Silen's answer. A student had to have a mission or a job to do, and it was a matter of confidentiality. If Silen didn't tell them first, they would have changed the topic at the same time. Alright, let's not talk about that. Do you want to go out and relax for a bit after we finally finished another round of exams? Zhen Xingming came over and put a hand on Silen's shoulder like a good brother while winking at him. Where to relax? Silen asked. I haven't decided yet. Let's go somewhere. Oh right, Kaka, didn't you mention that cousin is getting married? Has the wedding been held yet? Zhen Xingming and Ulaganyuo both pounded their fists in unison when Belle mentioned it. Yeah, let's go eat, drink, and see a beautiful bride. I heard that there will be a lot of pretty girls at the wedding. Ulaganyuo's cousin wasn't really a member of the royal family of Blizzard Windiska. In fact, they weren't even related by blood. Their relationship was a little more distant. He belonged to Ulaganyuo's mother's side of the family. However, because he had an aunt who was a royal concubine, his cousin managed to establish a connection with the royal family of Windiska. Uliganuo's cousin was doing quite well. After all, he was a member of the upper nobility. It was just that his status wasn't as high as a member of the royal family of Windiska. The royal family of Windiska didn't pay much attention to Uliganuo's cousin's wedding. Only Uliganuo's mother had mentioned it before. Originally, they only planned to send someone to deliver a gift, but now, of course we have to go since he's my cousin. And so, the rich kids quickly decided on their next destination. But before they could discuss the specifics, the door to Silen's dorm opened. The only person who could open this door freely was Silen and Huimao. Huimao walked in with his tail raised. He glanced at the people who were discussing excitedly before turning his head to the milk machine. Yo, long time no see, Wheeze. We were planning to go out and relax, do you want to come? Zhen Xingming froze on the spot like he was constipated before he could finish. Zhen Xingming wasn't the only one. Belle, Uliganuo, and Naimi all had the same expression on their faces. It was because another person had entered after the gray cat had entered. It was Taita who had just finished playing ball with Huimao. Long time no see, Silen. Taita greeted Silen before greeting Zhen Xingming and the others. Taita, why are you here? Zhen Xingming asked with a stiff smile. Taita tossed the ball in his hand. I just played ball with Wheeze, so I came to drink some milk. Taita walked to the chair next to the milk machine and sat down. He picked up the cup that Huimao pushed over with his tail to fill it with milk. Taita's old servant was standing outside Silen's dorm. He only came in after Silen invited him with a smile and a bow. Where did you say you were going to relax? Huimao looked at Zhen Xingming after he was done licking the milk. Zhen Xingming shook his head seriously. No, we just gathered together to relax and chat. Then we'll go back to our studies. That's right. We've learned a lot of areas of knowledge that we're weak in during the test, so we're going back to enrich our brains. Naimi hurriedly nodded to show that he was thinking the same thing. They shouldn't lead a child astray, especially one like Taita. If Taita's father found out about this, he would probably discuss the child's education with the three kings. If that happened, they wouldn't be able to avoid a memorable round of corporal punishment. Silen turned his head away and let them talk nonsense. Taita didn't want to continue arguing with them either, so he left after finishing his milk. His mother and siblings were coming to visit him today, so he couldn't stay here. After Taita left, Zhen Xingming and the others wiped their sweat and returned to normal. They rattled off a bunch of plans. Belle poked the tip of Huimao's tail. What do you think, Lord Cat? Are you interested in getting some free food and drinks? Huimao wiped the milk stain on the corner of his mouth on Belle's sleeve. Of course. Chapter 291. Silen did not leave immediately. Even though Huimao refused to budge and even threatened to go on a hunger strike, Silen did not change his mind. That was because after this large-scale test, Silen still had an elective course to attend. The instructor for this course was a well-respected old professor. He was quite good at academics, unlike some academicians in the Royal Academy of Sciences who wore academic hats and fought with politicians all day long. Of course, the reason why Silen chose to attend this old professor's course was not entirely because of his character. More importantly, it was because of the content that the old professor taught. The course this time was about audio interference and signal assimilation. Many students were not interested in this aspect, so there were not many who chose this course. The class was also a small one. A true teacher would do his best even if there was only one student sitting in class. This old teacher was such a person. Although there were only a dozen or so people in the class, the old teacher was still as passionate as ever, and the content of the class was very beneficial to Silen. The processed audio signal could affect other signals within a certain range. In class, the old tutor did an experiment. He played an audio signal, and the dozen or so students in the classroom turned on their communicators. Under the influence of this signal, the brightness and image displayed on the communicator's holographic screen jumped at the same rhythm. At the same time, a kind of bewitching power that made everyone's pulse almost synchronized was spread out by this audio signal. This feeling was very familiar to Silen. In the League of Stars, the Hunter group liked to use this kind of audio signal as a group music. The way the Hunter group appeared with this prelude signal was indeed very cool. However, what Silen was more concerned about was how much this audio signal could be expanded and how many places it could be used. Every time the class ended, it would be resumed after a period of time. This time, because the old professor had something else to do, he adjusted the course and brought forward the next class. Therefore, Silen had to stay at the affiliated school for a few more days. After the first class, Silen returned to the dormitory. As soon as he entered the door, he saw Hui Mao lying on the ground, moaning and groaning. It looked like it was about to collapse from diarrhea. Since Hui Mao had been protesting against Silen's decision to postpone his departure for the past 2 days, Silen was no longer surprised by its behavior. Hunger strike? Silen shot it a glance before walking past the gray cat that was pretending to be weak on the ground while holding the electronic notebook that contained his lecture notes. I told you many times to lick the crumbs off the side of your mouth after you're done stealing food. Besides, although I'm not a feline, I have a good sense of smell. I can smell the fishy smell from far away when you yawn. Hui Mao. Humph. He stopped pretending. Hui Mao crawled up from the ground and scratched Silen's pant leg, turning Silen's pant leg into a noodle shape. Also, Silen poked Hui Mao's round head, who was scratching his trouser leg. Don't think I don't know what's going on with the screen flashing like it was having a spasm today. Hui Mao pulled its ears back and didn't reply. It was just venting a little. Who told the teaching device to be so useless? How many more days do you need? Ever since Zhen Xingming and the others left, Hui Mao often made long-distance video calls with them. Zhen Xingming and the others had been enjoying themselves outside every day and showing off in front of Hui Mao, which made Hui Mao so angry that it went to bite the scale that the black adder had gifted it to grind its teeth. Who knew if the black adder would regret it when it saw that the scale it gifted to Hui Mao was used to vent its anger. 5 more days. The next class has been brought forward. 5 days. Hui Mao continued to pretend to be weak on the ground. It was too much of a blow to the cat. It had been so bored lately that it had a toothache. It swore on the few fish biscuits it had in stock that it didn't bite the scale. Then what are we going to do in the next 5 days? Hui Mao rolled around on the ground. The affiliated school was so boring. It seemed like everyone and every animal was busy. If there were no classes, then there were missions. People like Zhen Xingming and the others who had neither classes nor missions would just go out and enjoy themselves. Silen paused for a moment before saying, then let's go back to the Zhen family and take a look. I wonder if that little pet of yours is still throwing a tantrum. Silen didn't go back to the Zhen family last time because time was too tight. He only video called Zhenya for a bit. As for Hui Mao's pet sea beast, it had grown up again. Zhenya's yard was too small, so he put it directly into the artificial sea. Only the Fuji royal Zhen family, with their background and financial power, could easily build an artificial sea. Zhenya built a small yard next to the artificial sea and watched the sea beast play with the fish inside it every day. However, the sea beast seemed to be throwing a tantrum because Silen and Hui Mao didn't visit it. It often sprayed seawater into some of the buildings around the artificial sea or howled in the middle of the night, making people complain all over the place. It wasn't afraid that people would cook it and eat it because Zhenya was its backer. Hui Mao became spirited when he heard that they were going back to the Zhen family. Even if the Zhen family wasn't fun, it was still a lot better than the affiliated school. The restrictions of the affiliated school were too troublesome, so it was better to visit the Zhen family's pet and get some fresh fish from Zhenya. Silen quickly packed up his things under Hui Mao's urging. He left the affiliated school for the Zhen family's main residence after saying goodbye to Guanfeng. The guard fleet of the main residence only did a routine inspection when they saw Silen. They treated Silin very well and even sent someone to escort him to Jenya's place. The blue sea was very eye-catching in the middle of the green area. Although it was smaller than the sea Silin had seen before, the quality of the seawater was still pretty good. Jenya had planted a couple of Fuji trees in Jenya's new yard. They weren't as big as the ones in his yard, but they were growing pretty well. They didn't look dull when they were planted together. Jenya was very happy to see that Silin had returned. He didn't ask what Silin had been up to recently. Silin had his own path to walk, and no one could interfere with it. Jenya also believed that Silin would be able to take care of his own business. Children and grandchildren had their own happiness, and Jenya had long since regarded Silin as his own grandson. He didn't expect Silin to achieve anything great in the future. All he wanted was for Silin to live and be happy. Many times, parents and elders had high expectations for their children, but in reality, their bottom line was very low. Living well was their bottom line. Jenya had experienced too many things in his life that no one else knew about. No one, not even Zhen Liao, would be able to get the answers out of him if he didn't tell them. After experiencing so many things, Jenya enjoyed a peaceful life like this very much. Silin and Jenya sat together in the yard by the sea. They didn't need to talk, they just sat there quietly. It was better than anything else. At first, the sea beast howled loudly when it saw Silin and Hui Mao. After that, Hui Mao and Blueskin went to other parts of the artificial sea to play around. Even if the sea beast didn't grow under natural conditions, it might have been influenced by spending too much time with Hui Mao when it was born. To borrow Belle's mother's words, the sea beast had grown crooked. As it turned out, Belle's stubbornness was contagious. When Silin saw the sea beast pretending to be a seal and swinging its tail to catch the fish the gray cat threw at it to eat, he suddenly remembered the saying, "Do not wash one's dirty linen in public." It was fortunate that they were in this place. If they were somewhere else, especially those planets that were rich in sea beasts, they would laugh their heads off. "Oh right, you said you're going to attend Uliganuo's cousin's wedding?" Jenya asked. "Not really. Zhen Xingming and the others dragged me there to have some fun. Uliganuo even gave me his entry pass." Silin took out the entry pass and showed it to Jenya. The bride and groom weren't the only ones who handed out entry passes in the upper nobility circle. Most of the people behind the bride and groom were the ones who gave out entry passes. No matter what, profit was always the priority. Many of the guests invited by the elders were people the bride and groom hadn't even met before. They were only introduced to each other by the elders, and then everyone would greet them with a smile like they were old friends. That was why when Uliganuo asked for the entry pass and invitation from the organizer, they were overjoyed. They wanted nothing more than to stuff everything into Uliganuo's hands. After all, as a prince, the people he knew and the people he socialized with weren't just ordinary people. Jenya looked at the name and words on the card and smiled. "Oh, the bride is from the Gleason family." The Gleason family had a lot of influence in the military. In fact, they were no weaker than Taita and the Yurong family. Both the Gleason family and the Yurong family were big shots in the military. The Gleason family, Jenya told Silin about the Gleason family, but that was all in the past. Jenya knew a little about the current situation, but it wasn't very detailed. Still, judging from the past, the Gleason family wasn't too bad. They were very strict with their children's education, unlike the other nobles who raised a bunch of good-for-nobles. You can go take a look and give them a gift. The Zhen family will send someone there too, but it won't be a core member. After all, the bride with the Gleason surname wasn't a core member of the Gleason family. If she really was a core member of the Gleason family, the old General Gleason would have sent an invitation directly to the three kings. Although the three kings didn't go, three princes did sneak over. As for the word sneak that Zhen Xingming emphasized, it was probably more like taking off one's pants and farting. All three of them were familiar faces among the upper nobles, and they could guess the origins of the other two as soon as they recognized one of them. It wasn't hard to imagine how much they were enjoying themselves right now. Master Second Grandpa. Hui Mao climbed ashore and shook off the water. Then, he ran over and jumped onto Jenya's lap so that he could wipe his fur. "How much fish did you eat?" "Don't kill all the fish in here," Jenya said with a smile as he wiped Hui Mao's fur. "I didn't eat much. It was all blueskin." Silen looked at the frequency at which Hui Mao's whiskers were trembling and knew that the guy was definitely lying. When this guy lied, his ears would subconsciously move to the sides, back, or lower. His whiskers would also tremble at a specific frequency. Blueskin was the scapegoat. Hearing that Jenya wanted Silen to go out and make more friends, Hui Mao pointed his paw at Silen. "Look, even Master's second grandpa said that, but you're still stubborn." Silen raised an eyebrow and grabbed the fur on the back of Hui Mao's neck as he walked towards the other side of the sea. In a parabola, plop. When Hui Mao climbed ashore again, he purposely rolled around on the sand and rubbed against Silen's clothes, covering Silen's body with sand and seawater. Jenya was amused watching from the side. 5 days later, after Silen had returned to the affiliated school to attend that elective course, the gray cat immediately bit his trousers and dragged him out of the house. This fellow couldn't hold back at home, and the moment it was bored, it would look for something to do. And the thing that the gray cat looked for was to eat. It ate everything, mechanical, organic, everything. Raising such a cyborg cat with such a wide diet was seriously torturous. Hunger strike was bullshit after all. After packing up his things and grabbing Jenya's gift, Silen jumped onto the spaceplane he borrowed from Guanfeng with Hui Mao under his arm and flew towards the star map coordinates Zhen Xingming had given him. The destination planet had been decorated very well because of this wedding. Although the two parties involved in this wedding didn't mean much to the three kings, it was still quite famous among the upper-class nobles. When they discovered that all three princes were attending the wedding, those who weren't planning to send their children to the wedding immediately called their children over to interact with the three princes and the other upper-class nobles. Even if it was just to make them familiar with each other, it would still be good. From space, the entire planet was decorated. Some of the big heart-shaped patterns were visible to the naked eye. It was obvious that a lot of effort had gone into these decorations. The planet wasn't big, but it was beautiful and full of flowers. Unlike the little garden planet Silen saw in the League of Stars, this planet had a longer history. It was a private scenic planet owned by Ulaganyo's cousin's family. Most of the ships that came to the wedding were family fleets, and all of them had their family emblems printed on their starships. It was as if they were afraid that no one would know who they belonged to. Compared to these fleets, Silen's tiny spaceship seemed insignificant. There were a few large spaceships next to them that weren't starships, but they were still large spaceships with gorgeous appearances. When the people on those spaceships saw Silen's tiny spaceship without any emblems, they all sneered. "Are they here to attend the wedding too? No way. They must be some family's errand boy. Even the spaceships used by our family's servants are bigger than this one. Our house is the same, and it looks much more luxurious, not as shabby as yours. Which family is this guy from?" Some people asked each other through their communicators, but no one admitted to anything. Sigh, who would admit to something like this? It's pointless to ask. Some people felt that they had seen through the truth of the matter, and they spoke with an inscrutable tone. As soon as this statement was made, many people echoed it in agreement. Silen and Hui Mao stared at each other as they listened to the communication they had stolen from the device. How could Guanfeng's proud spaceship be criticized like this? One had to know that this spaceship was the work of Guanfeng and an engineering scholar from the Royal Academy of Sciences. If Guanfeng knew about this, he would have taken his new Purgatory Thunder Snake S and shot these people to death. Guanfeng was a man like this. It was fine to criticize other people, his character, and some of his misdeeds, but you couldn't criticize his work for no reason. If you criticized them blindly and couldn't find a reason for it, Guanfeng would fly into a rage. These people really don't know what's good for them. How dare they flaunt such a trash spaceship? Hui Mao said disdainfully. A pause later, Hui Mao wagged his tail and grinned. Should we give them a greeting gift, Silen? Chapter 292. A greeting gift? Silen looked at Huemao's eager expression and smiled. What do you want to do? Many aristocrats like to use elegance to flaunt themselves. In fact, apart from their bright appearance, some people's hearts were dirtier than the public garbage dump in AF1. For example, some of the people who had spoken just now. Therefore, Silen did not stop Huemao's revenge. On some of the starships and aircrafts that were rushing to the wedding, many people were still talking. In order to show off their influence in this circle, many people started video calling each other before they even met each other. They talked and laughed in a familiar tone. The topic quickly changed from belittling Silen's small and shabby aircraft to the people and gifts that he had brought this time. However, as they were talking and laughing, they found that the image on the screen began to blur. Not long after, the screen became clear again, but it was not the image of the other party. Instead, it was another scene. On the vast grassland, two elephants were performing primitive impulsive movements. For a moment, the people on the surrounding aircrafts and starships were dead silent. Not only these people, but even Silen, who was sitting in the aircraft, after seeing this image, his face twitched for a long time. Where did you get these films? Silen asked as he pinched Huemao's ear. He really did not know that this cat was so wretched. It actually knew how to hide films. Huemao said proudly, I got them from King Kong. That guy is still hiding it from others. Then why didn't you bring out 2 gorillas, but 2 elephants? It's not good to let gorillas out. If King Kong knew about it, he would be shy. Shy. He even hid so many films, and they were of different species. The animals in AF1 were not well behaved. The nobles on the starship were so angry that their faces turned blue. It was obvious that someone had hacked into their starship's network and signal receiving system, but no one had discovered it, and no alarm had sounded. According to their usual practice, they would have been furious, but after all, this place was close to the wedding venue, and everyone was paying attention to it. Therefore, they could only investigate in secret and did not dare to say anything. It would be too embarrassing to say it out loud. Should they ask everyone they met, hey, do you have elephants? That would be a complete loss of face for the nobles. The patrol fleet stationed on the periphery of the planet did not notice this anomaly because Huemao did not target them. The patrol team was still carrying out their mission, and the ceremonial team was already waiting at the spaceport. If they wanted to leave the starship and spaceplane at the spaceport, the people in charge of reception in the ceremonial team would help them with that, and then send a spaceplane to take them to the planet. If they wanted to fly directly into the planet, they would give the guests a map with the docking point marked on it. At the same time, there would be special guides in charge of navigating the way. Many aristocrats who brought a large number of troops into the planet would not bring all of their troops into the planet. They did this for safety and to show off their family's financial and material resources. To enter the planet, one would definitely need identification. For fleets with a large number of troops, the reception staff at the periphery would only say a few words to them and let them pass. For people like Silen, who had the advantage of flying alone and did not have the special aristocratic emblem, they would definitely have to check more closely. The ceremonial team at the spaceport had already issued a rather polite reminder for Silen to park the spaceport, where there would be specialized personnel to receive and check the pass card and invitation. Silen flew the spaceport according to the guidance shown by the received signal. He had nothing to worry about. He had the pass card and invitation. Even if he did not have an aristocratic background, these people would not make things difficult for him. After flying in through a passage opened by the spaceport and stopping the spaceport, Silen opened the hatch. There were already people waiting not far away. The higher the aristocracy, the more they understood the word etiquette. Even if these were all on the surface, they would not neglect it. Therefore, the reception staff did not show any disdain or contempt towards Silen even though he did not have the aristocratic emblem on him during the identity verification. They still maintained a smile on their faces. Hello, Mr. Silen, is it? I am Rido, the person in charge of reception sent by the Lore family. It is a pleasure to have you here. The immaculately dressed middle-aged man walked over and bowed politely. The Lore family was Uliganuo's cousin's family. They were a member of the upper nobility, and although they were not as powerful as Taita's military giant Urong family or Naime's Sizer family who made a fortune by building flying cars, the Lore family still had a certain amount of influence in the business world. They had a lot of connections, or the Gleason family wouldn't have agreed to this marriage and made such a big fuss. Hello. Silen did not say much and took out the invitation letter and entry pass of his own accord. If he didn't take the initiative, this man would beat around the bush and say a lot more. He caught the invitation letter and entry pass with both hands and placed them on a machine to verify their authenticity. However, when he saw the small pattern displayed on the machine when it scanned the entry pass, the smile on Rido's face grew a little wider and more sincere. After the verification was complete, Rido handed the invitation letter and entry pass back to Silen with both hands. At the same time, he bowed a little wider than before. Thank you for coming. Silen accepted the invitation letter and entry pass. He asked if there was anything else he needed to check, but Rido shook his head with a smile and took out a map projection to personally explain the flight route to Silen after they entered the planet. Someone who could receive guests here was definitely not an ordinary servant. It could be said that Rido was definitely a trusted aide of the Lore family. After all, if this matter was not handled properly, they would become enemies with the Lore family. In the process, they would have to face many nobles. Those who could recognize the faces of these nobles would definitely be among them. Therefore, even if this person's status in the Lore family was not high, it was definitely not low either. In fact, after checking the invitation letter and entry pass, they still had to do an identity check. In any case, the people who would come here would not be big nobles, so they were not afraid of being criticized for a few more checks. However, after hearing Silen's question, Rido decisively shook his head. The entry pass in Silen's hand and Carrie's hand contained a joint pattern of the Lore family and the Gleason family. This joint pattern would only appear when the entry pass was scanned by a machine. Although there were many entry passes given out for this wedding, and they all looked the same on the surface, they were not actually the same. The entry passes that were given to Uliganuo were the ones from the Gleason family and the Lore family with a high-grade pattern. This meant that they would be treated with high standards. It was no wonder that Rido would react this way after seeing the pattern. In fact, even Rido himself was surprised. He could not believe that a person who did not have a noble identity would receive such a high-grade entry pass. Seeing Rido's reaction, Silen knew that there was definitely a secret behind it. However, Silen did not have the time to be curious about it. After Rido expressed that there was nothing else, Silen returned to the spaceship and flew it towards the planet. After Silen flew the spaceship away, Rido immediately contacted his master, the father of the wedding's bridegroom, a core member of the Lore family. After Rido told him about Silen's matter, the core member of the Lore family remained silent for a while. Then, he asked Rido to tell him about the information and serial number of the spaceship that had been scanned. Reed reported the serial number that he had scanned along with a few other pieces of data as he quietly waited for the other party's orders. So it's this. His tone was filled with surprise. Some spaceships and starships had serial numbers that were not as simple as they seemed on the surface. They contained hidden sequences, and these hidden serial numbers were coded characters. Only those who understood the meaning of these characters would be able to understand the meaning behind them. The people behind spaceships and starships with hidden serial numbers were all influential figures in the Empire. After understanding this, the other party was very satisfied with Rido's actions. This was also why he sent Rido to the spaceship to be in charge of the ceremonial reception. On the other side, Silen successfully landed his spaceship at the designated location under Rido's guidance and the guidance of a navigator Rido had sent out. This landing spot was very close to the main venue of the wedding. The surroundings were decorated with romantic colors and the atmosphere was very lively amidst the music. After refusing further guidance from the navigator, Silen took out his communicator and contacted Zhen Xingming. Silen, you're here. On the screen, Zhen Xingming was holding a glass of wine and doing something. He must have found a place to pick up the call after seeing Silen's call. Silen pointed at his face. It looks like you guys are having a good time here. There was also a fresh lip mark on Zhen Xingming's face. He didn't know which family's lady had applied it there. Zhen Xingming chuckled and wiped away the lip mark on his face. Sigh, it's still the same old. Nothing new. Although he said that, he knew that these people were having a good time when he saw Zhen Xingming's sneaky smile. Where are you? We're at. Zhen Xingming reported a location and sent the icon to Silen. Zhen Xingming couldn't locate Silen's communicator. It wasn't that easy to locate a guide's communicator. I just arrived. You guys go ahead and enjoy yourselves. I'll head over after a while, Silen said. Zhen Xingming was currently surrounded by a bunch of noble young masters and ladies. Although Zhen Xingming had found a gap to pick up the call, someone was already calling him to hurry up. Then hurry up. Gaga, Belle and the others are all here. It's fun when there are more people. Relationships are built by playing. Didn't second grandpa tell you to get to know more people? Come over, I'll introduce you to some good guys. Of course, I won't be stingy with pretty girls, hee hee. Alright, go ahead and enjoy yourselves. I'll head over to you guys in a bit. Alright, hurry up. No pretty girls if you're late. Someone was urging Zhen Xingming again. Zhen Xingming didn't waste any more time talking to Silen. He ended the call after a few vulgar scolding words and went back to having fun. Silen took a look at his surroundings after ending the call. This planet was a great natural attraction. It was obvious that the Rahl family had invested a lot of resources to preserve the planet's natural appearance and improve it. There were flying cars flying across the sky from time to time. Many noble children would bring their flying cars along with their spaceplanes or starships, but Silen didn't. Instead, Silen took out a hoverboard that he had made himself. He preferred the ease and convenience of a hoverboard over a flying car. Without wearing a windshield, Silen took to the sky on the hoverboard with Huimao clinging tightly to Silen's shoulder. The wind blowing at them messed up Huimao's fur, but it was a very exciting feeling that Huimao liked. After the incident on Mercury Eagle's back, Huimao had dreamed of growing wings a couple of times. Therefore, he liked the feeling of flying more and more. He couldn't feel this kind of excitement from a flying car at all. Wait, shouted Huimao as he slapped Silen with his paw. What's wrong? Asked Silen as he slowed down the hoverboard. The taste of food, said Huimao with a face full of reminiscence. Because this place was relatively close to the main venue of the wedding, there were buffet tables set up in this area for guests to enjoy. Many people would go there to replenish their food after they got tired of playing around. As expected, no matter how beautiful the dream of wings was, it couldn't resist the temptation of food. Silen changed his original flight path and flew to the nearest buffet marked on the map he had obtained when he came here. In fact, there was no need for this map. Huimao could tell the specific location just by saying it. The nearest buffet was actually a little far from where Silen was. Huimao's nose was indeed very sensitive. There were quite a lot of people at this buffet, but there were fewer young people. Most of the young people were gathered at a certain central area and were having a good time. Seeing Silen coming down on a hoverboard, many people snorted. There were luxury cars parked all around, but only Silen came down on such a simple thing. It would be strange if he didn't attract attention. Silen didn't care about other people's gazes. He came here to eat, not to struggle. After putting away the hoverboard, he washed his hands and asked Huimao to wash its paws. Silen took it out. After washing its paws, Huimao jumped onto an empty small table with its two hind legs like a kangaroo. When it jumped, the meat on its round body bounced. After sitting down on the small table, Whis rattled off a bunch of things and waited for Silen to bring the food over. After all, it wasn't very convenient for the cat to pick its own food from the table in front of a large crowd. There was a service robot, but Hui Mao said it didn't believe in the service of such a retarded robot. It asked Silen to help get the food. Silen took 2 plates and walked over, ignoring the curious gazes around him. One plate was filled with aquatic food, and the other plate was filled with a little more variety. As Silen was choosing food, a voice came from behind. "Excuse me, are you Brother Silen?" Silen turned around. Although the person had changed a little, Silen still recognized her. Kiva Lanani. The girl standing in front of him was the girl Silen had met when he went to Baron Bader Intermediate Education School to look for Chang Xiaosan and Chang Xiaoxi. Compared to his impression of her, the current Lanani was more like a pure aristocrat, be it in clothes or words. After all, there was still a difference between inside and outside the school. Plus, after not seeing her for a long time, the girl's eyebrows had opened up a little, giving her the air of a noble little princess. Most importantly, this noble lady didn't discriminate against commoners. Silen remembered that the girl was quite interested in Chang Xiaoxi, but he didn't know how their relationship had developed. Lanani was very happy to hear Silen call out her name. There weren't many people she was familiar with here, and she wasn't familiar with any of them at all. Her family could only be considered a middle noble, and she didn't have much confidence compared to most of the nobles here. If it weren't for the close business relationship between her family and the Lore family, her family wouldn't have been invited here, let alone to a place that was close to the core venue. Lanani's father was talking to someone not far away. Because of their business relationship, Lanani's father knew a lot of people. Because of the trend of profit, other nobles didn't care if you were a middle-class noble or not. But other than Lanani's family, there were also some middle-class nobles here. After all, upper-class nobles didn't make up the majority. Lanani came over and chatted with Silen after she informed her father. She was happy to run into someone she knew, and she was glad to meet someone she knew. However, Lanani's father wasn't happy to see Silen. After all, many people had seen Silen come down on those crude hoverboards. His first impression was directly put on the list of people he didn't know. But since the conversation was going on, Lanani's father didn't stop her from talking to Silen. Lanani followed Silen to the small table after choosing her food. Hui Mao raised his paw to greet Lanani absent-mindedly, then focused on the food on his plate. Silen asked a few questions about Chang 4 and the others. From Lanani's words, he learned that both Chang 3 and Chang 4 had entered one of the top-ranked advanced education schools in the Star region. Not only that, they were treated pretty well, and they could be considered as celebrities in the school. Silen trusted Chang 3 and Chang 4's abilities, but Silen didn't believe that Belle wasn't behind all this. The more Silen interacted with this circle, the more he understood the trickery. If it weren't for Belle, Chang 3 and Chang 4 wouldn't have received such preferential treatment in such a short time, no matter how capable they were. Lanani's eyes sparkled with pride and shyness at the mention of Chang 3 and Chang 4. Besides Chang San and Chang Si, Lanani also mentioned Chang Xiaowu. After the treatment, Chang Xiaowu quickly showed his talent, and he was currently studying at a school that was even more advanced than Baron Bader Intermediate Education Academy. That being said, Silen also deduced one thing from Lanani's words: the Sizer family was behind Chang Xiaowu. Belle might have pushed for Chang 5, but the Sizer family was the one who helped him from the shadows more than anything. It would seem that Fleeka thought very highly of this boy who wasn't even 10 years old yet. Moreover, Silen was absolutely certain that Chang 5 wouldn't disappoint Fleeka. Chang Xiaowu's talent was there for all to see, and he was Weeze's favorite disciple. Ahem, he could be considered half a favorite disciple if not a whole one. Coupled with Chang 5's experiences in his early years, he knew how to seize opportunities better than anyone else. Chang Xiaosan, Chang Xiaoxi, and Chang Xiaowu were doing well. The other children of the Chang family were also doing well. Lanani had visited them once. Old man Chang was getting more and more energetic, and the triplets had grown a little taller. It would be strange if they weren't doing well with a big shop and the planetary government's secret help. Silen was listening to Lunani talk about the Chang family when Hui Mao suddenly made a "ft" sound. Hui Mao spat out half of the fish head he was eating just now, and it hit a large piece of cake on the table not far away from him. A child was about to reach for the cake with a fork, but when he saw the half-eaten fish head on the cake, his mouth turned into a pout and he was about to cry. But when he looked up, he saw that the cat in front of him was smiling instead of crying. Pulling a nearby servant, the cat pointed at Hui Mao and said, "Look, there's a little leopard." "That's a cat, young master." "It's a leopard." "Yes, it's a leopard." Hui Mao didn't care that people thought of him as a leopard. He jumped onto Silen's shoulder and whispered to Silen, "Look, it's that weird kid." Silen looked in the direction Hui Mao was pointing. There was a group of people, and in front of the group was a 14 or 15-year-old boy. It was an acquaintance Silen had met once before. When Silen left Old Man Chang's place and was on his way to the capital, he saw the boy in the luxury suite on the top floor of a hotel through Hui Mao's surveillance camera. At that time, the boy and the people he brought with him didn't have any emblems on their clothes, so he couldn't tell which nobility they were from. But today, they had family emblems on their clothes. They were from the Gleason family. "Look, it's young Master Dodge from the Gleason family. I didn't expect this young master to show up. I heard that young Master Gleason has a lot of power in the family, really." Blah blah blah. Some people were already thinking of ways to curry favor and establish a relationship with him. So this is Gleason Dodge. Naimi once said that every upper-class noble in the empire knew that there were two brats in the empire other than the monarch and the three kings. One of them was Yurong Taita, and the other was Gleason Dodge. Anyone who dared to touch them would be met with great misfortune. It was a lesson learned from the mistakes of the past. Silen was familiar with Taita, but he didn't think that the other brat Naimi was talking about would be this young man. If Taita received special treatment from Old Man Yurong due to his age and special background, and caused the other upper-class nobles to treat him differently, then why was this boy different? Both Hui Mao and Silen had a deep impression of this boy. The boy's keen intuition was able to detect Hui Mao's surveillance. Up until now, there were very few people who could detect Hui Mao's surveillance, and Gleason Dodge was just a 14 or 15-year-old child. Even in the face of an assassination attempt, he was able to act as if he didn't hear anything. Such a person was indeed frightening, but it was hard to explain why people would put him in the same position as Taita, a brat that no one dared to mess with. Gleason Dodge and a group of people walked over from the distance. Their presence was so strong that everyone who wanted to go over and greet them was forced to stop in their tracks. A mere 14 or 15-year-old had such an aura. No wonder he had a say in the Gleason family. Having a say in the family meant that he could influence the Gleason family's attitude on many things and even important decisions. Gleason Dodge, it was hard not to be impressed. Because of the arrival of this group of people, the chatter in the surroundings quieted down, and it became a lot quieter. A few children who were using their spoons to knock on their plates were also stopped by their parents. Everyone knew that the legendary two brats were not to be trifled with, so they didn't dare to provoke this young master with such a strong presence in front of them. This group of people didn't pay attention to the others, and went straight to the table with a "don't disturb me" attitude. The people who were choosing their food at the table also hurriedly left. They didn't dare to block this young master's path. Gleason Dodge, who was leading a group of people to eat something and then leave, suddenly looked towards Silen's direction as if he sensed something. Hui Mao was whispering bad things about Dodge to Silen. Seeing Dodge suddenly look over, Hui Mao didn't show any weakness, and directly looked over with his round eyes. Dodge frowned slightly. He felt something familiar, but obviously hadn't seen this pair before. If he had seen this cat before, he would never forget it. What was this sense of familiarity? Seeing his young master's expression, a guard next to him came up and asked in a low voice. Dodge shook his head and continued to eat the food that the guard in front of him had prepared for him. So sensitive. Hui Mao snorted. How many times have I told you, that's called sensitive. Same meaning. Hui Mao squatted on Silen's shoulder and wagged his tail, then said, there are 4 invisible people around. Of course, Silen also noticed, so he was even more curious about why Gleason Dodge would be treated like this, as if he was always guarding against assassinations. Huh? Assassinations? When she first saw Gleason Dodge, this guy seemed to have been assassinated. Not simple at all. Lenani was just curious about the famous Gleason Dodge that people were talking about. This young man, who was only a few years older than her, had an aura that was far beyond his age. Even her father didn't give her such a feeling. Lenani, like everyone else, looked at Gleason Dodge curiously. She didn't notice the conversation between Hui Mao and Silen. Of course, even if she had noticed, she wouldn't have heard the conversation between Hui Mao and Silen. Dodge and the group of people he brought ate very quickly, which was in line with the dining etiquette of the nobles. It was because of this that the people around them had a higher opinion of this young man. After the meal, Dodge left with his people. He didn't talk to the people around him, but when he left, Dodge glanced at Silen and Hui Mao again. Celine, what do you think that brat's final glance meant? Did he already know that we were the ones watching him? Hui Mao said uncertainly. This young man was too strange. He knew it the first time he met him. Chapter 293. Silen didn't know if Gleason Dodge realized that Silen and Hui Mao were the ones who spied on him that day, but one thing was for sure, Gleason Dodge had begun to pay attention to both Silen and Hui Mao. The 15-year-old boy's intuition was too sharp, and Silen had to be prepared for it. After the young master of the Gleason family left with his people, the surrounding atmosphere began to relax again. However, the following topics were all about this great noble who was in his teens. As for Celine, he had long been forgotten by the people around him. Lenani excitedly told Silen about the legendary young genius. Dodge hadn't enrolled in any educational school, and he had learned everything from elementary education to advanced education on his own. By the time his peers started their elementary education, Dodge had already started his intermediate education, and it didn't take long for him to start his advanced education classes. Sometimes, he would attend some famous academies and listen to the guest lectures of the old academicians invited by the RAS. He wasn't faking it, he truly understood what they were saying. Lenani had said a lot about the young genius, Gleason Dodge. It was hard to tell how much of it was true, but there had to be a reason for it. Since there was such a rumor, it meant that something similar had happened more or less. People kept coming and going at the self-service lounge. As soon as they heard that Gleason Dodge had been there, the newcomers began to talk among themselves. Suddenly, Silen saw a familiar face walking toward him. Libero. Silen called out. The person who was sauntering towards Silen with his head hung low and looked very lethargic was none other than Libero, one of his roommates back when he was taking the AF5 entrance exam before he entered the AF5. Libero didn't say what kind of background he had, but it seemed like his father's status wasn't low. Libero's clothes had the emblem of the Lore family on it. When Libero heard his name, he raised his head and looked in the direction of the voice. When he saw Silen sitting there and waving at him, Libero's listless expression brightened. He smiled and ran over to Silen. Some people in the surroundings also saw Libero running over. These people would first look at the family emblem the newcomer was wearing, and then they would decide whether or not to greet him based on the family emblem. Someone was about to approach Libero when they saw the Lore family emblem on him. However, before they could take a step forward, someone pulled them back and whispered something to them. Then, the person who was about to approach Libero stopped and looked at him with disdain. If it weren't for the Lore family emblem on Libero's body, or if they were in a different place, they would definitely show their disdain. After all, this was the Lore family's private property. They had to give the Lore family some face, right? Libero was already used to the attitude of the people around him, so he didn't care. He walked over to Silen and sat down. Hey, why are you here? I didn't expect to see you here. Libero was very happy to see Silen. After all, Silen was one of the few people who didn't look down on the mutants. On top of that, they were roommates who had also attended the 5th exam. This was the first time Libero had seen Silen after they had parted ways. A friend gave me a pass, so I came here to eat and drink. I don't really know anyone here, Silen said. You don't know me? Who is this little girl? Aren't you going to introduce us? Libero squinted his eyes. He looked at Linani and then at Silen. His eyes seemed to say, brother, not bad. She's still a young flower. Don't be ridiculous. It's not what you think. Silen introduced both Linani and Libero to Linani. However, Silen only mentioned that they were former roommates when he introduced Libero, so he didn't go into too much detail. Speaking of which, I didn't expect you to be from the Lore family, Silen said. Libero smiled helplessly. I wouldn't have the right to come here if I wasn't accepted by AF2. AF2? The first advanced education school under the RAS? Linani exclaimed. It was too difficult for them to get into an affiliated school. AF3 was only for the upper class, and it was difficult to get in without a strong relationship with the upper class. As for AF1 and AF2, it was even more difficult. Rumor had it that they were where all the geniuses of the Empire gathered. Yeah, didn't Silen tell you? Libero asked. Noticing Linani's expression, he continued, Silen and I were roommates when we were taking the entrance exams at AF1's preparatory campus. In the end, I got into AF2, and Silen got into AF1. Linani's eyes were filled with admiration and admiration. She didn't expect to see geniuses from AF1 and AF2 in front of her. Entering these two affiliated schools wasn't something that could be entered just by having a noble's identity. It was all about genuine talent and learning. Libero was a little embarrassed by Linani's admiring gaze. He scratched his head and cleared his throat. He looked at Silen and changed the topic. Have you been busy lately? I've just finished a large-scale test. I'm doing fine. I don't have many assignments from my mentor. What about you? Me too, but my mentor knows my mentor from AF2. I was supposed to be assigned a task, but because of the wedding, my mentor gave me an early leave. Ever since Libero was accepted into AF2, there were still many people in the Lore family who looked down on him, but most of them no longer dared to show it in public. The affiliated schools were renowned throughout the Empire, not to mention that Libero was only able to get into AF2 through his own strength. It was exactly because of this that Libero received an entry card from his family. It was an acknowledgement that he was a member of the Lorga family. Since he was a member of the Lorga family, it was only natural that he would attend such an important wedding. The groom for this wedding was Lorga's half-brother. Although this older brother had never treated Libero well since he was a child, he was still a member of the Lorga family. Internal strife was fine, but he had to behave himself in front of other nobles. Many nobles who were close to the Lorga family knew who Libero was. He used to be the biggest joke in the family, and he would have been killed a long time ago if it wasn't for his mentor's help. Therefore, Libero's desperation to get into the affiliated schools wasn't just for the Lorga family's recognition. It was mainly for his mentor. Silen's communicator rang while the three were talking. It wasn't a video call, but an audio message from Zhen Xingming. It looked like the guy was too busy to make a video call right now. Just as Silen thought, Zhen Xingming's message was a pressing one. Silen replied after reading the message, I ran into two acquaintances. I'll head over after talking to them for a bit. Zhen Xingming, what acquaintances? Male or female? As long as it wasn't an old man's generation, they could all be brought along. Anyway, they were all young people. What was there to hide? Second grandpa had once said that young people should know how to have fun. Relationships were formed through playing, right? Silen was sure that Zhen Xingming had too much to drink right now. Plus, he could hear the laughter behind the voice. It must be quite lively over there right now. Silen hung up after replying, "I'll be there soon." Linani and Libero didn't know Zhen Xingming, so they couldn't tell whose voice it was. As for the other people around them, they were too far away to hear anything at all. "My friend asked me to go over. Do you two have plans? If not, let's go together," Silen said to Linani and Libero. Linani was a little afraid of strangers. Or rather, she was afraid of the supercilious looks from too many great nobles. However, this place was too unfamiliar to her, and she didn't want to leave just like that. Since they were Silen's friends, they should be easy to get along with. It was more accurate to say that she trusted little more than Silen. After reporting to her father briefly, Linani left with Silen to her father's dissatisfaction. As for Libero, he had the same thought as Linani. Since they were Silen's friends, they should be easy to get along with. "Do you have a flying car?" Since they were going to go together, Silen's hoverboard alone wasn't enough. They needed a flying car. Linani shook her head. She came here in her father's flying car and didn't bring her own. Libero didn't drive a flying car either. In fact, he didn't even come here in his private car, but a service car on the planet. Without a flying car, they could only borrow one from a car rental spot set up by the Rawl family. Silen borrowed one from the car rental spot with a pass card. The flying car's specs weren't great, but they definitely weren't bad either. Nobles cared a lot about their reputation, and giving them a low-quality car was basically a slap in the face. Silen sat in the driver's seat, Linani and Libero sat in the back, and Hui Mao was munching on a biscuit in the passenger's seat. After looking at the coordinates Zhen Xingming had given him, Silen drove the flying car towards that direction. He wasn't going too fast, and he didn't forget to take a look at the scenery below him while he was flying. Linani looked forward to the scenery very much, because every girl had a dream of becoming a bride. Libero wasn't very interested in the scenery. Some of the things here were even arranged by him, and he came back to do hard labor. His stomach hurt just thinking about it. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, while Silen was driving the flying car slowly towards the destination, a couple of flying cars flew past him. One of them almost brushed past the outer shell of Silen's flying car, and a couple of bullets hit the back of the car. Thankfully, the flying car's defenses were good, or else it would have been severely damaged. Linani was shocked by the series of events, and Libero wasn't much better off. He looked out the window and said angrily, "These noble kids are crazy." "Who are they?" Silen asked after he stabilized the flying car. "I don't know, but I've seen them racing a lot lately. I wouldn't have said anything if they were skilled, but the problem is, what kind of skills do they have? Every day, the Rawl clan's cleaning robots have to clean up dozens of wrecked flying cars due to racing. They've also accidentally injured a few people, but since the injured people aren't on any important missions, everyone keeps quiet about it." Libero grew angry at the mention of this. As expected, the lives of everyone other than nobles were worthless. These people had nowhere else to spend their money, and they were still in high spirits even when their luxury cars were turned into scrap metal. Silen changed his flight path and avoided these people when he saw a few flying cars firing at each other. If worst comes to worst, he'd just have to take a detour a little longer. That was what Celine thought, but those people really had their eyes on them. With a whoosh, they flew towards them again. When they flew over, they even released them while shouting crazily. Hui Mao said while biting into a biscuit, "Should we teach them a lesson?" At this distance, Hui Mao was more than capable of interfering with the flying car's control systems. Silen shook his head. Not many of these noble kids had real strength, and it was obvious just by looking at the flying car's trajectory. "Sit tight," Silen said to Linani and Libero before adjusting some of the settings on the flying car's control panel. What surprised Silen was that even though this was just a public rental car, it was still equipped with all sorts of surveillance and alarm systems. It was just that very few people would put these things to good use. Even though a rental car was a bit inferior to a custom-made car, as long as they had a good driver, this difference wouldn't be a problem. A few noble children were driving their flying cars and surrounding Silen's flying car. It was as if they were watching a movie, observing the cowardly expression of the trapped wretch and waiting for it to beg for mercy. But before they could act arrogantly for long, the poor bastard charged out of a gap in the encirclement as if he had been injected with chicken blood. He's rebelling. He still dares to escape. Damn! Hurry up and chase after him. They weren't afraid of people driving rental cars. This was why they were so unbridled. They had done this many times over the past few days, and every time they saw the people in the cars begging for mercy, they would feel a sense of accomplishment. But slowly, the nobles who were driving the luxurious cars realized that the pitiful worm seemed to have suddenly grown a few pairs of wings. Not only was it fast, but its flight path was also very difficult to grasp. Even if a few people joined forces to surround it, they would not be able to trap it. Some people had already started firing at Silen's car with their weapons, but Silen was able to dodge them all. The rental car didn't have any weapons installed, so Silen simply lured the tracer bullets towards the forest and flipped them over in a couple of quick blinks. The tracer bullets kept missing their target and hitting the trees or rocks on the ground. Fuck, could the person driving the rental car be the pilot of the fighter jet? Isn't he afraid of crashing into a mountain? Someone complained. I don't care if he's a fighter pilot or not. We have to shoot it down. Otherwise, how are we going to face people when we get back? How are we going to lose to a rental car driver? That's true. But some people were hesitant. This wasn't their territory, and it wouldn't be good to cause too much of a ruckus. There were only a few basic weapons on the car, and the rest had been removed by their families for safety reasons. From the looks of it, it would be very difficult to shoot down the rental car with the monotonous weapons left on the car. The surrounding flying cars were in hot pursuit, and Silen maintained the rental car's high-end speed almost all the time. Even if the surrounding cars were faster than Silen, they were flying around like headless flies due to Silen's zigzagging route. It was a complete waste of their high specs. After a sharp 90-degree turn, a flying car in hot pursuit crashed into a dense forest and didn't catch up. Silen didn't look at the flying car that crashed into the forest. The noble kid's flying car protection was enough to save their lives anyway. At most, they would suffer a little. Sometimes, Silen found it strange that the descendants of the three kings like Gen Xingming, Oliganuo, and Bel wouldn't be this crazy even if they went crazy. They would force their twisted pleasure onto unrelated people. If it was just the upper nobles, then what about Naimi and the others? It was a waste of youth if one didn't go crazy, but this kind of madness was already twisted enough. There was no way Silen would believe that these people's backgrounds were much better than Naimi's and the Sizer families. They were all nobles, and there was no way someone with a stronger background would be this twisted and insane. So what did these people rely on? Thump thump. 2 more flying cars were driven into the forest by Silen. He had no interest in wasting time with the remaining flying cars. The remaining flying cars couldn't form a circle anymore, so Silen thought it would be very easy for him to escape. Thus, the rental flying car that was labeled as a pitiful bug easily bypassed the obstacles of the buildings and trees in front of it and flew into the distance like the wind, leaving the flying car that was still flying and dodging obstacles farther and farther behind until it could no longer be seen. After making sure that he had shaken off the annoying flying cars, Silen checked the direction and flew towards his destination. Feeling that the atmosphere inside the car was too strange, Silen looked at Lunani and Libero through the rear-view camera. The 2 people were sitting there blankly with pale faces and clutching the handrails tightly. Libero's legs were still shaking. "Hey, you two, are you alright?" Silen asked. It took him a long time before he finally heard Libero's reply, I'm fine. I guess, Silen." He stopped the flying car in a grassy area so that Libero and Lunani could take a breather. The moment the flying car came to a stop, Lunani and Libero rushed out to vomit after they recovered from the shock. Silen rubbed his nose. That was a little too much. He glanced at Huimao, who was still leisurely munching on a biscuit and about to say something. Silen reached out to cover the dog's mouth, which was covered in biscuit crumbs. Otherwise, the dog would say something like, "Weak constitution," again. After Silen drove the flying car far away, the flying cars behind them also stopped. After they met up with the people who had crashed into the forest, one of the nobles took out his communicator and contacted a few people, asking them to look for the serial number of the rental car. He had just given the order when his communicator rang. "Hey, when are you guys coming? Don't mention it. We ran into some trouble. Stop bullshitting. Who are you trying to scare? Who would dare cause trouble for you?" The other party didn't seem to believe him. "Fuck. There really is one, and it's just a rental car." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.